You think you know your own children. You change their diapers, you pay for their college, and you love them unconditionally. But you never truly know them until there is a massive amount of money on the table. $2.5 million to be exact. That is what it took for my only son and his wife to decide. My mind was gone, my life was over, and my assets were theirs for the taking. They thought I was just a tired, grieving old widow. They completely forgot that before I retired, I spent 40 years eating sharks for breakfast in commercial real estate. If you want to steal from a woman who spent decades negotiating cutthroat property deals, you had better make sure she is actually losing her mind. I was not. It was a crisp Tuesday evening. I was standing on my own front porch holding a thick, heavy manila folder. Inside that folder were the notarized documents detailing the estate of my late brother Thomas. Thomas had passed away a month prior, leaving me his entire estate, a sum of $2.5 million. My heart was heavy with grief. Thomas and I had been incredibly close, and the reality of his absence was a physical weight on my chest. I had just returned from my lawyer's office, feeling exhausted and ready to simply sit in my armchair with a cup of hot tea and look at old photographs. As I reached for the front doorknob, I stopped. The large bay window overlooking the porch was cracked open to let in the spring breeze. Through the screen, I heard the distinct sound of crystal clinking. It was a celebratory toast. I frowned. My son David and my daughter-in-law Chloe had offered to come over and prepare dinner so I would not have to cook after the long legal meeting. I expected to walk into a quiet, solemn house. Instead, I heard them laughing. It was not warm laughter. It was the sharp, breathless sound of people who thought they had just won the lottery. I stepped closer to the window, staying hidden in the shadows of the porch awning. Chloe was speaking. Her voice was rapid and thrilled. She said, "David, do you understand what this means between the $2.5 million from your uncle and the equity she has in this house? We are looking at over $3 million. I can finally save the boutique. I can rebrand, expand to the West Coast, and pay off all the outstanding vendor invoices." I froze. Chloe owned a high-end fashion boutique downtown that I knew was bleeding money. She had terrible business sense, prioritizing expensive inventory she could not sell and blowing her budget on lavish launch parties. Then David spoke. His voice was lower-laced with a nervous energy. He said, "And I can clear the debts, Chloe. The guys I owe are getting impatient. If we pull this off, the gambling markers disappear and we start totally fresh. But we have to do this right. Mom is sharp. She is not just going to hand over control of her finances." Chloe scoffed. Her voice dripped with absolute disdain. She said, "David, your mother is 68 years old and grieving. She is exhausted. All we have to do is declare her legally incompetent. We tell a judge she is declining rapidly, that the grief has pushed her over the edge, and that she is suffering from severe cognitive decline. We get medical power of attorney and financial control. We put her in a nice, quiet assisted living facility, and we take over managing the assets. It is for her own good, really. She cannot handle this kind of money in her state." I stood in the cool evening air, clutching the manila folder against my chest. My own son, my flesh and blood. He was plotting to lock me away in a facility and strip me of everything I owned, everything I had built, and everything my brother had left me, all to pay off his gambling debts and fund his wife's vanity project. A weaker woman might have gasped. A weaker woman might have burst through the front door screaming and crying, demanding answers, and throwing them out of the house. But I did not spend my career surviving the commercial real estate market by letting my emotions dictate my actions. In real estate, when you realize the other party is acting in bad faith, you do not throw a tantrum. You secure your leverage. You assess the threat, you gather your evidence, and you let them walk blindly right into their own trap. My tears dried instantly. A cold, clear focus washed over me. I looked down at the notary folder in my hands. This was the proof of the money. If they saw this tonight, it would accelerate their timeline. They would know the funds were liquid and ready. I could not bring it inside. I stepped quietly backward off the porch and walked over to my heavy steel mailbox at the end of the driveway. It was a secure locking model I had installed years ago. I slipped the thick folder through the slot, heard it hit the bottom with a soft thud, and checked the lock. It was secure. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture, and prepared for the performance of my life. I walked back up the porch steps, intentionally dragging my left foot just a fraction to feign exhaustion. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, letting out a long, heavy sigh. I stepped into the foyer. The celebratory energy in the house vanished instantly. I heard the frantic rustling of movement from the kitchen, the sound of a cabinet slamming shut, and the clatter of a glass being hastily placed in the sink. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, letting my shoulders slump. I adopted the blank, slightly confused expression of a woman overwhelmed by her own life. David and Chloe were standing by the kitchen island. They had arranged a simple roast chicken and salad, but their faces were flushed. Chloe stepped forward immediately. The vicious, greedy woman I had just heard through the window was replaced by a sweet, doting angel. Her smile was sickeningly bright. "Clara," she cooed, rushing over to take my coat. "You look absolutely exhausted. How was the lawyer's office? It must have been so draining for you to deal with all that complicated paperwork today." I offered a weak, trembling smile. "It was a lot, Chloe. Just a lot of talking, a lot of legal terms. I honestly stopped paying attention halfway through. I am just so tired." David approached, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. His eyes were scanning my face, looking for signs of weakness. He said, "You need to rest, Mom. You cannot keep pushing yourself like this. Your memory has not been great lately, and stress is only going to make it worse. Why do you not sit down? Chloe is making your favorite tea." I nodded slowly, letting him guide me to a bar stool at the kitchen island. I placed my purse on the floor next to me and dropped a deliberately selected keyring onto the marble countertop. It held the keys to the house, my car, and the locked home office upstairs where I kept outdated financial records. The small mailbox key was not on that ring. I had slipped it into the hidden lining of my purse before entering the house because the notarized estate folder was still secured outside. I rested my head in my hands, keeping my eyes half closed, watching them through the gaps in my fingers. Chloe bustled around the stove, pouring hot water into a mug. David leaned against the counter next to me, asking me mundane questions about the traffic, trying to gauge my mental state. "Here you go, Clara," Chloe said, bringing the steaming mug to the island. "Drink this. It has chamomile. It will help your nerves." "Oh, thank you, dear," I murmured. I reached for the mug, purposely knocking over the small salt shaker next to it. "Oh, look at me. I am so clumsy today." "Let me get a towel," David said, turning his back and walking toward the pantry. In that split second, while my son's back was turned and I was supposedly staring blankly at spilled salt, Chloe made her move. She smiled at me, maintaining eye contact, and casually slid her hand across the marble counter. Her manicured fingers wrapped around my master keyring. With a fluid, practiced motion, she slipped the keys right off the counter and dropped them directly into her oversized designer purse resting on the chair beside her. She did not break eye contact. She just kept smiling her sweet, toxic smile. She intended to wait until I was asleep to ransack my home office and find out exactly how much money I had. My blood boiled, but my face remained perfectly blank. I had seen everything, but to react now would ruin the advantage. I had to let them think their plan was working flawlessly. I took a slow sip of the tea. "Thank you, Chloe. This is exactly what I needed. I think I will just head upstairs and lie down. I do not have much of an appetite." I stood up, gripping the edge of the counter as if my balance was failing. Then I put on a show of patting my pockets and looking around the bare countertop. I frowned, letting a look of mild panic cross my face. "Oh dear," I whispered. "My keys. I just had my keys. Where did I put them?" David walked back with a towel and wiped up the salt. "What is wrong, Mom?" "My keys, David. I know I brought them inside. I thought I put them right here on the counter, but they are gone. Oh, my memory really is getting terrible. I cannot keep track of anything anymore." I frantically patted the pockets of my cardigan, turning in slow circles. Chloe stepped up beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. Her voice was thick with fake sympathy. "Clara, do not panic. You probably just left them in the front door, or maybe they fell into your purse. You have had such a long day. Your mind is just completely overwhelmed. Why do you not go upstairs and get into bed? David and I will search the house for you. We will find them. Do not stress yourself out." I looked at her, widening my eyes to look frightened and vulnerable. "You are right. You are right, Chloe. I am just so forgetful lately. It scares me. Please find them." "We will, Mom," David said. He sounded entirely too pleased. "Go rest. We will handle everything down here." I nodded, turning away from them and walking slowly out of the kitchen. I gripped the handrail of the staircase and began the long climb up to the second floor. Every step I took, I maintained the slow, heavy gait of a defeated woman, but inside my mind was racing. They had my keys. They had full access to the house. They thought I was a senile fool who could be easily manipulated. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated 40 years of business survival. I did not keep my most important financial documents in my home office. Those were in a secure safety deposit box at the bank. The files currently in my office were outdated tax returns and closed accounts. Let Chloe dig through them. Let her waste her time. I reached the top of the stairs, but I did not go to my bedroom. Instead, I stepped quietly into the deep shadows of the landing, pressing my back against the wall. The hallway was completely dark, providing the perfect vantage point to look down over the banister into the foyer below. I waited in absolute silence. Less than 2 minutes later, David walked out of the kitchen and into the foyer, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was pacing, his face illuminated by the dim light of the entryway chandelier. He looked over his shoulder toward the stairs, completely failing to see me standing in the darkness above. He stopped pacing and spoke in a harsh, hushed whisper. "Yeah, it is David. I know it is late, but I need a favor. No, it cannot wait until tomorrow. My mother is declining fast. It is worse than we thought. She does not even know where she is half the time. We need to draft the power of attorney tonight. Yes, full medical and financial control. I will pay whatever your emergency fee is. Just get the paperwork ready. We are making our move." The next morning, Chloe returned the key ring with an embarrassed smile and claimed she had found it inside the pocket of my coat. I thanked her and pretended to be relieved. I knew she had kept it long enough to copy the office key, so I left the decoy records exactly where they were and installed a concealed camera before the next visit. The next evening, I drove to David and Chloe's house using my spare car key. A cool spring breeze moved through the immaculate driveway of their sprawling modern farmhouse, a stark white and black monument to Chloe's ambition. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, straightened my thoughts, then let my shoulders droop and my hands tremble. By the time David opened the front door, the hard-edged commercial real estate broker had disappeared. In her place stood a tired, grieving widow who seemed frightened by her own memory. For 40 arduous years, I had successfully navigated the absolutely cutthroat, ruthless world of commercial real estate. I had sat across vast mahogany boardroom tables from predatory developers, icy investment bankers, and silver-tongued corporate lawyers who would smile charmingly while actively trying to bankrupt me and steal my hard-earned livelihood. I knew exactly how to read the complex dynamics of a room before a single syllable was ever spoken aloud. I knew how to weaponize absolute silence to make weaker opponents break and reveal their hidden hands. But tonight, I needed an entirely different kind of specialized weapon. Tonight, to survive the impending ambush I knew was coming, I desperately needed to play the role of the prey. I consciously let my shoulders droop a fraction of an inch, rounding my back, just enough to simulate the heavy burden of advancing age and creeping fatigue. I deliberately softened my jawline, allowing a subtle, pathetic tremor to enter my hands as I slowly reached over to retrieve my leather purse from the passenger seat. The psychological and physical transition was completely flawless. The formidable, sharp-minded businesswoman completely vanished into the shadows of the car interior, replaced entirely by a fragile, slightly overwhelmed, and hopelessly confused older widow. David opened the heavy front door before I even reached the top step of the porch. My son looked utterly exhausted, the deep lines around his eyes hardening into permanent fixtures of chronic stress. He wore a forced, tight smile that did not even begin to reach his evasive gaze. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, his movements entirely stiff and mechanical, lacking any genuine familial warmth. Chloe materialized right behind him, radiating a cloying, artificial enthusiasm that instantly set my finely tuned nerves on high alert. Chloe wore a spotless, expensive silk blouse and an expression of exaggerated theatrical pity. She ushered me inside the brightly lit house with gentle, patronizing touches to my arm and shoulder, speaking in that slow, loud, over-enunciated cadence that arrogant people typically reserve for toddlers or the hard of hearing. I played along beautifully, stepping into the trap with open eyes. I offered a wavering, uncertain smile, my eyes darting nervously around the overly bright foyer, as if the modern geometric light fixtures genuinely confused and frightened me. I allowed Chloe to guide me through the hallway toward the dining room, taking slow, deliberate, shuffling steps that masked my usual brisk stride. The dining table was an aggressive display of wealth, set with heavy linen napkins, polished silver and crystal wine glasses, creating a stark and uncomfortable contrast to the casual, chaotic family dinners we used to share many years ago when my husband was still alive. We took our seats. David immediately poured a robust, dark red wine, filling my glass, just enough to appear polite, but strictly limiting the pour, to avoid suggesting any genuine relaxed hospitality. The meal set before us was an overly complicated, overly seasoned roasted lamb dish that Chloe had clearly purchased from a high-end local catering service and deceitfully transferred to her own ceramic serving platters. I chewed the meat slowly, offering mild, agreeable praise for the cooking that required absolutely no real cognitive effort to produce. Then the psychological theater officially began. It started remarkably small, a testing of the waters. I had deliberately set my crystal wine glass directly above my silver knife, a rigid habit ingrained over a lifetime of attending formal business dinners. While David temporarily engaged me in a mundane, hollow conversation about the cool spring weather, Chloe reached across the polished table with lightning speed and silently shifted the wine glass several inches to the left, placing it awkwardly and illogically near the small bread plate. I caught the entire movement perfectly in my peripheral vision. A younger, slightly less disciplined version of me would have immediately snapped a sharp reprimand at the sheer rudeness of the gesture. Instead, I waited patiently, letting the trap set. A full minute later, I reached my hand forward for my wine, my fingers grasping empty air directly above the knife where the glass should have been. I blinked rapidly, portraying a perfect Oscar-worthy mask of mild confusion and rising anxiety. I looked down at the empty tablecloth, patted the smooth wood gently with trembling fingers, and finally turned my head to locate the glass sitting inexplicably on my far left. Chloe seized the manufactured moment instantly. She leaned forward over her untouched plate, her voice dripping with thick counterfeit concern. She loudly asked if I was feeling entirely all right tonight, noting with a heavy sigh that I had seemed terribly distracted and disorganized lately. I manufactured a small, self-deprecating chuckle, touching my forehead lightly, and blaming the mistake on the strange shadows cast by the dining room chandelier. But Chloe absolutely refused to let the narrative drop. She exchanged a heavy, highly significant look with David across the centerpiece. David cleared his throat nervously, staring fixedly down at his roasted lamb, and quietly mentioned that I had completely forgotten the details of their long phone conversation from yesterday afternoon. I knew precisely what brief conversation he meant, a 2-minute chat about his dying tomato plants, but I widened my eyes in a brilliant display of genuine bewilderment. I let my hand flutter upward to clutch at the collar of my blouse, a defensive gesture I had practiced earlier in my bathroom mirror. I softly, hesitantly insisted that they had not spoken at all on Tuesday, acting as if my memory was a blank slate. Chloe immediately chimed in her tone, sharpening just a fraction into reprimand, aggressively insisting that David had indeed called her, that they had talked for over 20 minutes about important family matters, and that my rapidly deteriorating memory was becoming a very serious point of worry for everyone involved. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the coordinated lie was breathtaking to witness firsthand. They were flawlessly executing a classic textbook gaslighting maneuver, aggressively attempting to erode my confidence in my own mind and reality. I absorbed the psychological strike without flinching internally deliberately, allowing a look of raw, genuine fear to cross my aged features. It was a perfectly controlled fear, carefully calibrated to feed their towering, greedy egos. Directly across the wide table, 17-year-old Leo sat in a state of heavy, brooding silence. I had barely looked at my teenage grandson since arriving at the house, intentionally keeping my focus entirely on my son and daughter-in-law to maintain the convincing illusion of being completely overwhelmed by their relentless interrogation. But now, as Chloe continued to enthusiastically catalog a completely fabricated list of my recent cognitive failures and supposed accidents, I risked a quick, calculated glance at the boy. Leo was a tall, angular teenager with dark, highly intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He was aggressively pushing his expensive lamb around his porcelain plate with the sharp tines of his fork, a dark, stormy scowl etched deeply into his youthful face. He was not looking at me with pity. He was glaring directly at his mother with unvarnished contempt. The sheer disgust radiating from the boy was a palpable force, a silent, raging scream echoing in the middle of the pretentious dining room. He gripped the handle of his silver fork so tightly his knuckles had turned stark white under the dining room lights. He knew. I felt a sudden sharp jolt of electric intuition strike my chest. Leo saw right through the entire sickening performance. But crucially, he was not exposing my deceptive act to his parents. He was silently judging his parents' overwhelming cruelty. I quickly looked away, rapidly returning my frightened, watery gaze to Chloe, carefully storing Leo's fascinating reaction in the back of my strategic mind for later analysis. The dinner rapidly progressed from subtle, deniable psychological manipulation to outright aggressive tactical assault. Chloe poured herself a generous second glass of the robust wine and adopted a tone of grim, unyielding medical authority. She loudly announced that they had taken the liberty of making a very important appointment on my behalf. I let my heavy silver fork clatter loudly against the porcelain plate, an intentional, dramatic display of shock and sudden clumsiness. I asked what the appointment was, for making sure my voice trembled perfectly on the final syllable. David finally looked up from his meal, his face flushed with a deep, ugly shade of guilt, and mumbled the words cognitive assessment into his napkin. Chloe took over the conversation immediately, completely steamrolling any potential objection I might raise. She brightly explained that the appointment was scheduled with Dr. Evans, describing the man as a top-tier regional neurologist, and quite conveniently, a very close personal friend of hers from her exclusive country club days. I mentally cataloged the name with cold precision. Dr. Evans, a personal friend of Chloe's, a bought and paid for medical diagnosis just waiting to happen. They fully intended to walk me blindly into a rigged medical examination to have me declared legally incompetent and entirely unfit to manage my own vast affairs. It was a bold, incredibly vicious strategy. In the cutthroat world of commercial real estate, this exact maneuver was the equivalent of attempting a hostile corporate takeover, utilizing completely forged safety inspection reports and bribed city officials. I forced a single crystalline tear to well up in my right eye, letting it trace a slow, agonizing path down my purposefully unpowdered cheek. I whispered brokenly that I did not need to see a strange doctor, that I was just feeling a little tired from the changing seasons. Chloe reached across the table and patted my trembling hand with a cold, impossibly firm grip, insisting with terrifying cheerfulness that the matter was already completely settled and that they were only acting out of deep, unconditional love and profound concern for my future well-being. The trap had been successfully sprung, but Chloe was incredibly greedy. Financial predators always were, emboldened by my apparent total submission and weeping fragility. Chloe immediately pressed her perceived advantage. She shifted the dining room conversation directly to the topic of physical safety. She stated, not asked, that I should absolutely no longer be driving a vehicle under any circumstances. The local roads were becoming far too dangerous, my elderly reflexes were obviously too slow, and they simply could not sleep a wink at night, constantly worrying about me causing a fatal accident behind the wheel. I kept my head bowed low in shame, staring blankly at my half-eaten gourmet meal, projecting an aura of total crushing defeat. Then came the true, singular objective of the entire evening, the final killing blow. Chloe's voice dropped a full octave, adopting a carefully practiced tone of sensible financial pragmatism, heavily mixed with burdensome familial duty. She casually brought up my house, the large, beautiful, fully paid-off historical property sitting on a highly coveted prime piece of suburban real estate. Chloe suggested with a wave of her manicured hand that managing the rising property taxes, coordinating the endless seasonal maintenance, and worrying about the complex legal liabilities was simply far too much burden for someone in my rapidly declining and fragile mental state. Chloe proposed a wonderfully simple solution to all these fabricated problems: a rapid, quiet transfer of the property deed directly into David and Chloe's names, just for temporary safekeeping. Chloe promised smoothly, her smile never reaching her cold eyes. A mere legal formality designed specifically to protect my hard-earned assets from any predatory scams currently targeting the vulnerable elderly population in their area. The incredibly bitter, suffocating irony of that specific statement almost made me violently break character and laugh out loud right in her daughter-in-law's face. They were the actual predators sitting at the table. They wanted the valuable house, the absolute core of my independent wealth, and they desperately wanted to secure it before the rigged medical assessment even officially took place. I utilized every single ounce of my grueling professional training to completely suppress the searing volcanic rage currently burning inside my chest. I had ruthlessly negotiated multi-million-dollar leases with absolute corporate sharks, terrible men who would smile warmly while aggressively twisting a legal knife in your back, but the raw betrayal coming directly from my own flesh and blood carried a unique, suffocating, highly toxic venom. I looked across the table at David silently, desperately pleading with him through my tears to stop this madness, to finally intervene to be the strong son I had spent decades trying to raise. David immediately looked away, staring intensely at an abstract painting hanging on the dining room wall, completely surrendering what little remained of his spine to his wife's towering ambition. I let out a long, ragged, pathetic sigh, producing the exact sound of a woman who was utterly broken and exhausted by the crushing weight of my own presumed cognitive decline. I whispered weakly that I would try to think about it, that absolutely everything was moving so incredibly fast, and that my poor head was spinning from all the sudden information. Chloe smiled widely, revealing a triumphant, razor-sharp expression of total victory. She cheerfully and loudly declared that they would happily handle all the complicated legal paperwork for me, and that I did not need to worry my pretty little head about a single financial detail ever again. Dinner was effectively over. The arrogant conquerors had confidently staked their claim. Chloe stood up briskly from the table, brightly declaring that it was finally time for dessert and fresh coffee, and sharply commanded David to carry the heavy serving plates into the kitchen. As the couple bustled into the next room, their hushed, urgent voices carrying the distinct, sickening tone of conspiratorial success and premature celebration. I remained seated silently for a long moment. The dining room was suddenly very quiet and empty. I looked across the wide table. Leo's chair was completely empty. The teenager had silently slipped away unnoticed during the intense climax of Chloe's financial ambush. I stood up slowly. My knees and joints ached slightly, a genuine annoying symptom of my actual age, but my mind was as incredibly sharp as a flawless diamond cutting effortlessly through cheap glass. I absolutely did not want their catered dessert. I did not want to spend another single agonizing second breathing the toxic, suffocating air inside this house. I reached down and picked up my heavy leather purse from the floor, moving with a quiet, highly practiced stealth that entirely contradicted the frail, shuffling persona I had just performed so masterfully I bypassed the kitchen doorway entirely. I walked swiftly through the darkened, immaculate living room, my expensive shoes making absolutely no sound on the plush white carpet, and quietly let myself out the heavy mahogany front door into the night. The cool, refreshing night air hit my flushed face like a welcome physical blow, instantly washing away the suffocating, oppressive atmosphere of the dining room. I stood entirely still on the front porch for a moment, letting the heavy wooden door click shut behind me, and finally dropped the pathetic mask completely. My spine straightened immediately, physically transforming my posture from a stooped, terrified victim to a commanding, powerful matriarch in the span of a single heartbeat. The fabricated tremors in my hands vanished instantly, replaced by rock-solid stillness. My watering eyes dried and hardened into cold, calculating, predatory slits. I walked briskly down the front steps toward my sedan parked in the driveway, my brilliant mind already rapidly spinning through a dozen different legal countermeasures, aggressive forensic accounting strategies, and the specific names of the most vicious, bloodthirsty litigators I kept safely secured in my private office Rolodex. I reached a steady hand into my purse to retrieve my car keys, my thumb brushing confidently against the cold metal. As I approached the front bumper of the vehicle, a dark shadow suddenly detached itself from the gloom of the driveway. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart giving a brief, sharp kick of surprise before my ironclad discipline violently clamped down on my physical reaction. Someone was sitting directly on the hood of my car. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, triggering the motion sensor security light mounted on the garage, immediately flooding the entire driveway with blinding, harsh white illumination. It was Leo. The 17-year-old boy was perched casually on the hood of my sedan, his long legs dangling over the front bumper, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark, lightweight jacket. He was no longer scowling. His face was set in hard lines of grim, premature adulthood. The raw disgust I had witnessed at the dinner table had fully crystallized into absolute, resolute clarity. He did not look like a sullen, rebellious teenager anymore. He looked exactly like a highly trained soldier, patiently waiting for his commanding officer to issue orders. I stopped exactly 3 feet away, my keys resting in my steady hand. I did not bother asking what he was doing hiding out here in the cold. I did not offer a gentle grandmotherly platitude about the weather or the dinner. I simply waited, meeting his intense, burning gaze with equal, uncompromising measure, deliberately allowing him to finally see the true Clara, the ruthless businesswoman who had just flawlessly played both of his arrogant parents like a pair of cheap, out-of-tune violins. Leo leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto mine with fierce, unwavering intensity. He spoke in a low, incredibly sharp whisper that cut completely through the quiet suburban night air like a freshly honed blade. "They're trying to rob you, Grandma. I saw Mom taking photos of your bank statements last week. Tell me what we need to do." The cold suburban night seemed to hold its breath as I stared at my 17-year-old grandson. The motion sensor light above the garage cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across Leo's face, stripping away the last remnants of his childhood. He did not look like a boy seeking comfort from his grandmother. He looked like an informant slipping across enemy lines with stolen state secrets. I did not rush forward to hug him. I did not offer sweet, grandmotherly reassurances that everything was going to be fine. 40 years of surviving the brutal trenches of commercial real estate had taught me to recognize a crucial shift in leverage when I saw one. You do not coddle a whistleblower. You deploy them. I lowered my purse and kept my posture perfectly straight, the frail widow routine completely discarded. I matched his intense gaze with a calm assessment of my own. I asked him exactly what he had seen, my voice devoid of any wavering emotion. Leo did not hesitate. He explained that he had walked into the kitchen late Tuesday night and caught his mother hovering over her glowing phone, actively taking photographs of my quarterly investment summaries. Documents I had foolishly left in a supposedly secure desk drawer during a previous visit. Leo described the frantic, greedy energy radiating from his mother, the way she had hastily locked her phone screen the moment he entered the room, and the terrible, plastic smile she had plastered on her face to cover her tracks. He knew they were broke. He knew the boutique was failing miserably. But he also knew his parents were planning something far more permanent than simply asking for a loan. They were hunting for total control. I listened in absolute silence, my mind shifting gears with the smooth, oiled precision of a high-end sports car. The emotional sting of my son's betrayal was pushed firmly into a locked, impenetrable box in the back of my mind. Right now, I needed raw, actionable intelligence, and my grandson was offering me the keys to the kingdom. I accepted his alliance with a single decisive nod. The battlefield had been established, and it was time to rig the terrain. The following morning dawned bright and deceptively cheerful. The spring sunshine poured through the bay windows of my historic home, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Leo had arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, carrying a heavy canvas backpack loaded with tangled cables and a sleek silver laptop. He had skipped his first 2 periods of high school, claiming a phantom stomach bug to his mother to secure the perimeter of my digital life. While I brewed a strong pot of dark roast coffee, completely dropping the trembling hands act in the privacy of my own kitchen, Leo went to work. He bypassed the standard internet router I used for my daily browsing and retrieved a small, unassuming black box from his backpack. He explained the strategy in rapid, concise terms. It was a mirror network. He was broadcasting a secondary cloned Wi-Fi signal perfectly identical to my existing network, utilizing the exact same network name and password. When his mother arrived and inevitably connected her laptop to snoop through my digital files, she would unknowingly route every single keystroke, every downloaded file, and every accessed web page directly through Leo's interception hardware. It was the digital equivalent of tapping a phone line, allowing us to capture the raw data traffic in real time. I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard with a deep, unexpected surge of professional pride. I had spent decades hiring expensive corporate espionage firms to uncover hidden liabilities in competing real estate firms before major acquisitions. Now, the most effective operative I had ever seen was sitting at my breakfast nook, fueled by teenage rebellion and a profound disgust for his own parents' greed. The trap was fully operational by 9:30. Leo stashed his equipment in a heavy oak cabinet in the pantry, leaving only an unassuming tablet resting flat on the kitchen island to monitor the incoming data stream. He retreated to the shadowed alcove near the back staircase, out of sight but entirely present. 10 minutes later, the heavy tires of Chloe's luxury SUV crunched against the gravel of the driveway. I took a deep, steadying breath. I let my shoulders slump forward, instantly shaving an inch off my height. I softened my facial muscles, allowing a pleasant, slightly vacant expression to settle over my sharp features. I shuffled to the front door, pulling my thick cardigan tight across my chest. Chloe stood on the porch holding a plastic caddy overflowing with expensive organic cleaning supplies. She wore a pristine pair of designer yoga pants and a smile so aggressively bright it practically hurt to look at. She immediately launched into a loud theatrical monologue about how she had just found some free time in her incredibly busy schedule and simply could not bear the thought of me struggling with the heavy housework in her fragile grieving state. I stepped back, letting the predator into the house. I murmured my weak, trembling thanks, leaning heavily against the doorframe to simulate chronic fatigue. I told Chloe I was utterly exhausted, that my joints ached, and that grief over Thomas had left my mind clouded. It was a masterclass in giving the enemy exactly what they wanted to see. Chloe practically vibrated with triumphant energy. She ushered me toward the living room sofa with firm, patronizing pats on the shoulder, insisting that I sit down, rest my poor, weary bones, and let her take care of absolutely everything. The moment I was seated, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace, Chloe abandoned the cleaning caddy in the hallway. She did not march toward the kitchen with a sponge. She marched directly upstairs toward my private home office. The house fell into a heavy, expectant silence. From my position on the sofa, I could hear the distinct, muffled sounds of drawers being pulled open and pushed shut. I heard the soft rustle of paper being shifted. Chloe was frantically hunting for the physical copy of Thomas's newly executed will, desperate to confirm the exact liquid value of the $2.5 million estate. But I had already secured the real documents in a fireproof vault across town. What Chloe was currently finding were carefully curated decoys: outdated property assessments, expired life insurance policies, and meaningless tax returns from a decade ago. Then came the sound I had been waiting for, the distinct, crisp chime of Chloe's laptop powering on. In the shadows of this kitchen pantry, Leo tapped the screen of his tablet. The mirror network flared to life. For the next 45 minutes, I remained perfectly still on the living room sofa, playing the role of the docile, sleeping widow. Upstairs, Chloe was tearing through my digital history, desperately logging into web portals and attempting to bypass password prompts. Every frantic search, every frustrated click was silently captured and fed directly into the tablet resting on the kitchen island. Finally, the floorboards groaned above. Chloe was packing up. I immediately closed my eyes, letting my breathing slow to a deep, rhythmic rattle. Chloe descended the stairs, her footsteps heavy with frustration. She paused in the living room doorway, watching me for a long, calculating moment to ensure the old woman was truly asleep. Satisfied with the illusion, Chloe loudly announced that she had finished dusting the upstairs and was heading out to run errands for the boutique. She called out a sickly sweet goodbye, promising to check in tomorrow. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. I opened my eyes. The pathetic, exhausted widow vanished instantly. I stood up smoothly, my posture rigid and commanding, and walked briskly into the kitchen. Before doing anything else, I called a locksmith and replaced the office lock. Chloe had used a copied key once. Neither she nor David would use it again. If they returned, they would have to force their way inside, and the camera would record the damage. Leo emerged from the pantry shadows, his face pale and drawn tight with absolute shock. He was staring down at the glowing screen of the tablet, completely ignoring the fact that his mother had just left the premises. He did not look triumphant. He looked physically ill. I stepped up beside him, resting my hands flat against the cool marble of the island. I looked down at the intercepted data scrolling across the screen. It was not a collection of unpaid vendor invoices from a struggling fashion boutique. It was a chaotic, terrifying autopsy of total financial ruin. Leo had intercepted a massive cache of synchronized emails and hidden cloud documents. Chloe had been frantically accessing to check her own balances while hunting for my wealth. The truth laid bare on the screen was staggering. David and Chloe were not just bleeding money, they were actively hemorrhaging their very survival. I leaned closer, translating the digital chaos into hard, unforgiving numbers, with the instincts of a seasoned businesswoman. There were aggressive, threatening notices from high-interest private lenders. There were furious emails from illegal betting operators detailing missed payments and escalating penalties. There were second and third mortgage defaults on their supposedly pristine suburban fortress. The total liability was a staggering $450,000, and the debt was not structured through polite, regulated banking institutions. The tone of the intercepted emails was violent, predatory, and brutally impatient. The creditors were demanding immediate liquidation of assets. They were threatening physical visits to David's workplace. The final deadline for a massive balloon payment was less than 72 hours away. I felt the breath catch in my throat. This radically altered the entire landscape of the war. My son and daughter-in-law were not just greedy, entitled brats looking to fund a lavish lifestyle. They were cornered, desperate animals staring down the barrel of total financial annihilation. The urgency to declare me legally incompetent was not born of convenience. It was a matter of literal life and death for their social and physical standing. They needed my $2.5 million inheritance right now this very week, or their entire world would violently collapse. Desperate people do not follow the rules. Desperate people make catastrophic, reckless decisions. I realized with chilling clarity that Chloe and David were highly dangerous. They would not wait for a slow, methodical court proceeding. They would force the issue. They would forge whatever signatures they needed. They would drag me to a rigged doctor immediately. Leo looked up at me, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and revulsion. He pointed a trembling finger at a specific email chain on the screen. The subject line read, "Final Notice of Default." The sender was a private lending group known for ruthless collection tactics. He whispered that they were going to lose the house. He said they were going to lose absolutely everything, and that they were planning to use my money to pay off criminals. I did not offer empty comfort. I simply nodded my mind, already calculating a dozen different defensive legal strategies to lock my assets down behind impenetrable trusts before the day was out. I reached out and placed a firm, steadying hand on Leo's shoulder, anchoring the boy in the turbulent storm of his parents' massive failures. I told him we were going to secure the perimeter. I told him we were going to contact a forensic accountant and build a fortress around the estate that no forged power of attorney could ever penetrate. We were standing shoulder to shoulder in the quiet kitchen, staring down at the glowing tablet, completely absorbed in the terrifying reality of the $450,000 debt. We were so focused on the screen, so entirely locked into the digital horror show unfolding before us, that neither of us heard the soft metallic click of the front door unlocking. Neither of us had realized that Chloe, in her frantic, frustrated rush to leave after failing to find the will, upstairs had left her oversized designer purse sitting directly on the entryway table. The heavy footsteps in the foyer were loud, rapid, and entirely unexpected. My head snapped up. Leo froze his hand, hovering over the tablet. Chloe strode directly into the kitchen, her car keys jingling harshly in her hand. The sweet, patronizing mask she had worn earlier was completely gone, replaced by the irritated, sharp expression of a woman rushing to retrieve a forgotten item. Chloe stopped dead in the center of the kitchen floor. The room plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. Chloe's eyes darted from my perfectly straight, commanding posture to the pale, terrified face of her teenage son. Then her gaze dropped like a stone, locking directly onto the illuminated tablet resting on the kitchen island between us. The screen was still displaying the aggressive, threatening email from her private creditors, detailing the exact amount of her hidden catastrophic debt. The air in the room grew instantly toxic. Chloe's posture stiffened. The irritation on her face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating, and deeply aggressive suspicion. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her manicured hands balling into tight, white-knuckled fists at her sides. "What are you two looking at?" Chloe demanded, walking aggressively toward the island. I reacted before Leo could speak. My shoulders collapsed, my mouth fell open, and I began tapping random places on the screen, as though I had no idea what I had done. I told Chloe I had been trying to order gardening gloves, but the tablet kept showing frightening numbers. She snatched it from my hands, and Leo used the movement to trigger the prepared shopping screen. A page of flower pots and pruning shears replaced the debt records. Chloe stared at me, then at Leo, searching for proof of deception. I apologized repeatedly and asked whether I had accidentally spent too much money. Her suspicion did not disappear, but contempt won. She called me hopeless, shoved the tablet back across the island, grabbed her purse, and left. Only after the engine of her SUV faded down the street did Leo restore the hidden files. That narrow escape proved we no longer had the luxury of moving slowly. When the silence fully returned, I let out a slow, controlled breath. I reached across the marble island and swiped my finger across the screen, closing out the colorful shopping application and instantly bringing the intercepted financial data back to the surface. The narrow escape sent a massive, sobering surge of clarity rushing through my veins. The timeline I had assumed they were operating on had just violently evaporated. David and Chloe were $450,000 in debt to violent, unforgiving people, and their massive balloon payment was due in a matter of days. Desperate people did not wait for slow, methodical legal processes. They did not have the luxury of waiting a month for a rigged medical assessment. They were cornered animals, staring down the barrel of total ruin, and cornered animals always went straight for the throat. I looked across the counter at Leo. The teenager was pale, his hands gripping the edge of the island tight enough to turn his knuckles completely white. He had just witnessed the terrifying reality of his parents' bottomless greed. I did not offer him a gentle smile. I did not coddle him. I dropped the frail widow persona entirely, my posture snapping straight, my voice dropping into the sharp, authoritative cadence of a corporate executive preparing for a hostile boardroom takeover. Keep monitoring that network. I commanded, my eyes locked on the scrolling digital numbers. If they send any urgent emails, if they attempt to secure a bridge loan, or if they try to move any digital funds, I want to know about it instantly. Lock the front deadbolt and do not open this door for anyone. "Where are you going?" Leo asked, his voice barely a hollow whisper. "I am going to build a wall," I replied, turning sharply and grabbing my heavy wool coat from the hall closet. A wall they cannot climb over, dig under, or forge their way through. 40 minutes later, I bypassed the busy main lobby of a sleek downtown high-rise, taking the private executive elevator directly to the top floor. I walked through the towering glass doors of Sterling & Vance, a premier estate planning firm that catered exclusively to the city's highest net worth individuals. The receptionist immediately stood up, offering a polite greeting, but I ignored the pleasantries entirely. I demanded to see Jonathan Vance and walked straight down the plush carpeted hallway before the receptionist could even pick up the telephone. Jonathan Vance was a man who looked like he had been born wearing a tailored Italian suit. He had been my personal attorney for 2 decades. He had navigated me through the complex, treacherous legalities of commercial property acquisitions and aggressive corporate tax structures. He knew better than anyone that I was not a fragile, grieving mark to be swindled. I shut the heavy oak door behind me, turned the lock, and dropped my leather purse directly onto his polished desk. "Jonathan," I said, cutting off his surprised welcome, "I need an irrevocable blind trust established immediately. I need it properly drafted, executed, and funded before close of business today." Jonathan blinked slowly, setting down his gold fountain pen. "Clara, it is wonderful to see you, but an irrevocable trust takes significant time to structure properly. What is the sudden, massive urgency?" "My late brother left me $2.5 million, I stated plainly, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite him and resting my hands flat on my knees. "My son and daughter-in-law are currently nearly $500,000 in debt to private aggressive creditors. They are planning to declare me legally incompetent, to seize my current assets and the new inheritance to save themselves from bankruptcy." Jonathan sat back in his chair, a look of profound professional shock registering across his features. "David is actively attempting to steal your estate." "David is attempting to erase me entirely," I corrected coldly, my eyes hard and uncompromising. "They have already arranged a rigged medical assessment with a corrupt neurologist. They plan to drug me with fake concern, secure a fraudulent power of attorney, and lock me in an assisted living facility so they can liquidate my life. They are desperate, and they are out of time. So we are going to take the prize completely off the board today." Jonathan leaned forward, his brilliant legal mind instantly shifting into combat mode. "An irrevocable trust will completely remove the assets from your direct control, Clara. Once the funds are transferred, you cannot change your mind. Even if David successfully obtains a fraudulent medical power of attorney, he will have absolutely zero legal authority to touch a single penny inside that structure." "That is exactly the point," I said, my voice dripping with absolute resolve. "I want the entire $2.5 million inheritance dumped directly into it. I want my commercial property dividends routed there as well. I want to be legally separated from my own wealth. Name my grandson Leo as the sole ultimate beneficiary. Appoint your firm as the blind trustee. If David or Chloe come knocking with forged documents, I want them to hit a solid titanium wall." Jonathan pulled a fresh, yellow legal pad toward him. He knew better than to argue with me when I had that specific predatory gleam in my eyes. It was the exact same look I wore right before I bankrupted a rival commercial developer in the late 90s. "We will need an independent psychological evaluation today," Jonathan advised, writing rapidly across the page. "Just to preemptively counter their impending claim of severe cognitive decline, I will call Dr. Aris. He is an independent forensic psychiatrist. He can meet us here in an hour. We will record the entire session. You will pass with flying colors, and it will render any diagnosis their bought doctor provides completely worthless in a court of law." "Do it," I ordered, "and Jonathan, make the trust impenetrable. I want ironclad poison pill clauses. If anyone attempts to challenge the trust's validity, they are automatically disinherited and held personally liable for all associated legal fees." For the next 4 grueling hours, I sat in that corner office and systematically disassembled my own financial vulnerability. I met with the forensic psychiatrist, answering his complex cognitive tests and memory questions with sharp, flawless precision, securing a certified, notarized legal document proving my perfect mental acuity. I signed page after dense page of complex legal structures, effectively locking away my newfound wealth in a fortress that David could never breach. By the time I took the private elevator back down to the underground parking garage, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the concrete pillars. I had secured the money. I had outmaneuvered their medical trap. I felt a deep, satisfying surge of familiar triumph. I was back in my element, flawlessly playing the high-stakes game I knew best. But the victory was incredibly short-lived. I drove back to the suburbs, the evening traffic crawling agonizingly slow along the highway. As I finally pulled onto my quiet, tree-lined street, a soft, distinct chime echoed through the quiet cabin of my car. It was a specific notification sound coming from my cell phone resting in the center console. I pulled into my driveway, parked the car, and killed the engine. The house was entirely dark. Leo must have gone home for the evening. I picked up my phone. The screen displayed a high-priority alert from the hidden security application Leo had covertly installed on my device the night before. The alert indicated motion detection in a restricted zone, the upstairs home office. I felt a sudden icy chill wash completely over me. I did not get out of the car. I sat perfectly still in the dim green glow of the dashboard lights and tapped the notification, instantly opening the live video feed. The miniature camera, Leo had concealed inside a decorative bookshelf speaker, provided a crystal-clear, high-definition view of my private workspace. The room was bathed in the harsh white light of my heavy brass desk lamp. Sitting in my heavy leather desk chair was David. I was not casually snooping. He was not gently looking for a misplaced tax document. He had completely bypassed the locked door, tearing the metal strike plate right off the wooden frame. The splintered, ruined wood was clearly visible in the corner of the camera frame. I stared at the small screen, my breath violently catching in my throat. David had several thick stacks of paper spread out across my mahogany desk. He was hunched over the surface, his posture incredibly tight and frantic. In his left hand, he held a thick black rubber stamp. In his right hand, he gripped a blue ink pen. I zoomed in on the video feed, my heart hammering a slow, steady rhythm of absolute sinking dread. The documents on the desk were not old tax returns or outdated bank statements. They were brand new, freshly printed legal forms. At the top of the visible page in bold, undeniable black letters were the words, "Quitclaim deed and absolute power of attorney." I was not waiting for the rigged doctor appointment. The intercepted emails were right. The creditors were closing in, the grace period was gone, and David had completely panicked. He had abandoned the slow, methodical, psychological manipulation entirely. He was moving straight into felony criminal fraud. I watched through this glowing screen as my son pressed the heavy rubber stamp onto an ink pad and slammed it down hard onto the bottom of the legal document. It was a notary public seal. He had clearly purchased a fraudulent stamp online or stolen one from a corrupt business colleague. Then he took the blue pen and leaned closely over the paper. He pulled a canceled check from a stack of my old mail resting beside him. He stared at my signature on the check for a long, intense moment. Then he slowly, meticulously began dragging the pen across the bottom line of the forged property transfer deed. I was practicing my signature. He was tracing the exact loops and curves of my name over and over again on a scrap piece of paper before moving to the official stamped document. He was going to forge my signature, steal my home, and drain my bank accounts before the weekend was even over. I sat in the dark car, the suffocating silence of the suburban evening pressing in heavily around me. The image of my own son, carefully committing a serious felony in my private sanctuary, burned itself permanently into my retinas. All the remaining maternal instinct, the tiny fragile hope that David was just a confused victim of Chloe's manipulation, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He was not a victim. He was a willing, eager participant in my total destruction. He was meticulously planning to strip me of my dignity and my home, leaving me penniless and locked away. I lowered the phone to my lap, my face hardening into cold granite. The sadness evaporated completely, leaving no trace behind. It was entirely replaced by a terrifying, calculated wrath. They thought I was a senile, weak-old woman who could be easily discarded. They thought they could simply forge my name and steal my kingdom without consequence. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed a master negotiator the exact devastating leverage I needed to utterly ruin them. The morning sun offered no warmth as I settled into the back seat of David's car. The leather interior smelled of expensive cologne and cheap desperation. Chloe sat in the passenger seat directly in front of me, her posture rigid with anticipation. She turned her head, offering me a smile so artificial it could have been manufactured in a plastic factory. She spoke to me in that slow, sickeningly sweet cadence usually reserved for stray animals or confused toddlers. She promised me that today was just a simple formality, a quick little chat with a nice doctor to make sure my memory was functioning properly after the tragedy of losing my brother. I responded by pulling my knitted cardigan tighter around my shoulders and offering a vacant, trembling nod. I let my gaze wander aimlessly out the window as the suburban landscape rolled past. I perfected the illusion of a woman completely unmoored from reality. Inside my mind, however, the gears were turning with the lethal precision of a vault-locking mechanism. I was not thinking about my brother's death. I was thinking about the encrypted flash drive Leo had handed me at 3 a.m. I was thinking about the 50-page dossier currently resting inside my oversized leather handbag, sitting on the floorboard beneath my feet. The drive to the clinic took exactly 40 minutes. David navigated the morning traffic with aggressive, jerky movements, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He was terrified. The intercepted data from Leo's mirror network had proven just how cornered my son truly was. The balloon payment on his massive illegal gambling debt was looming, and the private creditors were closing in fast. He needed me declared legally incompetent today. He needed the medical power of attorney signed by noon so he could seize my assets before his creditors broke his kneecaps. We arrived at a sleek, modern medical building situated in the most affluent district of the city. This was not a standard hospital with crowded waiting rooms and overworked nurses. This was a private concierge clinic. The lobby featured polished marble floors, abstract artwork, and the quiet, discreet atmosphere of a place where wealthy people paid exorbitant amounts of money to have their inconvenient problems quietly erased. Chloe marched to the reception desk and announced our arrival with the haughty confidence of a conqueror claiming new territory. David hovered near the seating area, pacing like a trapped animal. I shuffled slowly toward a plush waiting chair, taking tiny, deliberate steps. 10 minutes later, a heavy oak door opened, and Dr. Richard Evans stepped into the lobby. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would sell his medical license for a country club membership. He was deeply tanned, wearing a custom-tailored suit beneath his pristine white lab coat and sporting a smile that was entirely too polished. He approached us with open arms, greeting Chloe with the familiar warmth of an old friend. They exchanged pleasantries about a recent golf tournament, completely ignoring my presence until Chloe finally gestured in my direction. "Here she is, Richard," Chloe said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sorrow. "As we discussed on the phone, she has been declining so rapidly. We are just devastated, but we know we have to do what is best for her safety." Dr. Evans turned his predatory gaze toward me. He knelt slightly to meet my eye level, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my knee. "Hello, Clara," he murmured smoothly. "We are going to have a nice little talk in my office today. Why do you not come with me?" I stood up slowly, letting my hands tremble visibly. Chloe immediately stepped forward, linking her arm tightly through mine. "I will come right in with her," Chloe announced confidently. "She gets very confused and frightened when she is left alone." This was the critical juncture. The entire counteroffensive relied on me isolating the doctor. I stopped walking. I planted my feet firmly on the marble floor and looked directly at Dr. Evans. I widened my eyes, projecting a perfect mask of sudden elderly stubbornness. "No," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the vowel. "I do not want an audience. I want to speak to the doctor alone. It is my medical privacy. I read a pamphlet about it." Chloe's grip on my arm tightened like a vice. "Clara, do not be silly," she hissed through a forced smile. "You need me in there to help you answer the questions. You know your memory is terrible today." I shook my head stubbornly, clutching my heavy leather purse to my chest. "I will only go in if I can go alone. Otherwise, I am calling a taxi and going home right now." Dr. Evans let out a soft, condescending chuckle. He looked at Chloe and offered a subtle, dismissive wink. He clearly believed that humoring a stubborn old woman was the easiest path to getting her into the examination chair. "It is perfectly fine," Chloe, the doctor said smoothly. "Patient confidentiality is paramount. Let her come in alone. It will only take a few minutes to complete the standard cognitive evaluation." Chloe glared at me, her eyes flashing with pure venom, but she released my arm. She stepped back, joining David in the waiting area. "We will be right out here waiting for you, Clara," David said, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. I nodded weakly and followed Dr. Evans into his private office. The room was a monument to unearned arrogance. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the space. The walls were lined with expensive degrees and framed photographs of the doctor posing on various luxury yachts. I took a seat in the leather patient chair opposite his desk, keeping my purse firmly on my lap. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, sealing us in absolute privacy. Dr. Evans walked around his desk and took his seat. He picked up a silver pen and pulled a standardized medical form toward him. He did not bother making eye contact. He was already checking boxes on the paperwork before the examination even began. "All right, Clara," he started, using that insufferable slow tone again. "Let us start with some very simple questions. Can you tell me what year it is? Can you tell me who the president is?" I did not answer him. Instead, I completely dropped the frail widow persona. I straightened my spine, instantly rolling back 20 years of fabricated age. The calculated tremor in my hands vanished, replaced by the absolute rock-solid stillness of a seasoned corporate predator. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out the thick manila envelope Leo had prepared, and dropped it directly onto the center of his pristine mahogany desk. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wood echoed loudly in the quiet office. Dr. Evans stopped writing. He finally looked up from his fraudulent paperwork. His polished smile faltered slightly as he registered the sudden dramatic shift in my posture and demeanor. "What is this, Clara?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "It is 1984, I stated clearly, my voice ringing out with sharp, commanding authority. "That is the year you graduated from medical school, Richard. You specialized in neurology because it was lucrative, not because you cared about healing people. Currently, the president resides in Washington, but the real power in this room is sitting directly across from you. I suggest you open the envelope." Dr. Evans stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. The patronizing warmth completely drained from his face, replaced by a rising tide of genuine alarm. He slowly reached out and opened the metal clasp of the envelope. He pulled out the stack of documents and began to read. I sat perfectly still, watching his world dismantle itself page by page. 40 years in the commercial real estate market had taught me exactly how to read a man breaking under pressure. I watched the color rapidly drain from his tanned cheeks. I watched a bead of sweat form at his temple. I watched his breathing turn shallow and erratic as his eyes scanned the undeniable proof of his own corruption. Leo had done an immaculate job organizing evidence that Chloe herself had exposed when she connected to the mirrored network. The dossier contained synchronized invoices, consulting agreements, corporate credit card statements, and email attachments copied from her own cloud session. Together with public business filings, they showed a series of large payments from Chloe's failing boutique to a shell consulting account controlled by Dr. Evans. The payments were labeled as fashion ergonomics advice, a service that did not exist, and the email chain tied those payments to promised incompetency evaluations for wealthy families. The dossier also included travel receipts and photographs attached to Chloe's own reimbursement files, showing that her boutique card had paid for Dr. Evans's luxury vacation. None of the evidence required us to invent a crime or alter a record. It was his own paper trail preserved exactly as he and Chloe had created it. Dr. Evans dropped the papers onto his desk as if they had suddenly caught fire. His silver pen slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "Where did you get this?" He choked out his voice, barely a whisper. "These are private records." They are records Chloe synchronized through a network she voluntarily used, I said coldly. More importantly, they are authentic records of your conduct. I was not there to bargain over his outrage. I told him the payments emails and promised diagnoses were enough for the medical board, the state attorney general, and a fraud investigator to begin asking questions that would end his career. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled out of the water. He was entirely paralyzed by the sudden catastrophic destruction of his carefully constructed life. You have two choices today. I continued, my tone flat and uncompromising. Choice one involves me walking out of this office, driving directly to the state medical board, and handing this entire dossier to federal investigators. I will ensure your license is revoked before the sun sets, and you will spend the rest of your life answering questions in a windowless interrogation room. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around his own office as if looking for a hidden exit. And choice two, he rasped. Choice two is simpler, I replied. You are going to conduct a genuine, complete cognitive assessment under recorded conditions. You will score every answer honestly, document the results on official letterhead, and state exactly what the examination proves. I did not need him to fabricate anything. I had already passed an independent forensic evaluation that morning. I needed his own honest findings to destroy the diagnosis Chloe had purchased before he could sign it. But Chloe paid me, he stammered weakly, his survival instinct warring with his greed. She told me you were completely gone. She said it would be easy. Chloe is currently $450,000 in debt to violent loan sharks, I countered, instantly stripping away his last remaining illusion. She cannot protect you, Richard. She cannot even protect herself. She walked you right into a trap because she underestimated the woman she was trying to rob. Do not make the exact same fatal mistake. Write the letter. Dr. Evans stared into my eyes for 5 long seconds. He searched for any trace of bluff, any hint of weakness or hesitation. He found absolutely nothing but the cold, hardened resolve of a woman who ate corporate sharks for breakfast before he even owned his first stethoscope. He broke. For the next hour, he administered the full battery of memory, reasoning, language, spatial, and judgment tests. I answered every question cleanly. When the scoring was complete, the results placed me well above the threshold for independent decision-making. With shaking hands, he wrote what the evidence required. Clara Sterling displayed intact memory, sound judgment, and full capacity to manage her medical and financial affairs without outside control. He stamped the bottom of the page with his heavy embosser and scribbled his signature across the line. He slid the paper across the desk toward me. His face was a mask of total defeat. I picked up the document, reviewing every single word with a critical eye. It was perfect. It was a titanium shield against any future claims of incompetence. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my purse. Then I reached out and pulled the manila envelope of blackmail material back to my side of the desk, dropping it into the bag right next to the medical certificate. I will be keeping this file in a highly secure location, I informed him softly. If David or Chloe ever attempt to challenge this document, or if you ever try to contact them to explain what happened in this room today, the authorities will receive this dossier immediately. Do we understand each other? Yes, he whispered, looking physically ill. We understand. Excellent. I stood up from the chair. I deliberately rounded my shoulders, letting my posture slump back into the familiar shape of a tired, fragile widow. I allowed a slight tremor to return to my fingers. The transition was seamless. Shall we go give my loving family the good news, Doctor? Dr. Evans stood up on unsteady legs. He walked to the heavy oak door and pulled it open. The waiting room was exactly as we had left it. David was pacing near the water cooler while Chloe sat on the edge of a leather sofa, her designer purse clutched tightly in her lap. The moment the door opened, they both snapped to attention. Chloe practically sprinted across the lobby toward us, her face glowing with greedy anticipation. She was already reaching her hand out, fully expecting Dr. Evans to hand her the signed power of attorney documents that would give her total control of my $2.5 million inheritance. Well, Richard, Chloe asked brightly, her voice echoing in the quiet lobby. How did our poor Clara do? We have the legal paperwork right here ready for your signature. Dr. Evans looked at Chloe, then he looked at the floor. He cleared his throat, his voice sounding thin and weak. There is no need for any paperwork, Chloe, Dr. Evans said. He could not bring himself to look David in the eye. I have completed a comprehensive neurological evaluation. Clara is in absolutely perfect cognitive health. In fact, her mental acuity is exceptionally sharp. She is functioning perfectly. There is absolutely no medical justification for a power of attorney. She is entirely capable of managing her own life. The silence that crashed down over the waiting room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Chloe's outstretched hand froze in midair. Her sickeningly sweet smile rigidly locked onto her face, but her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. She stared at the doctor as if he had just spoken to her in a dead language. "What are you talking about, Richard?" Chloe demanded, her voice dropping its sweet facade and turning harsh and dangerous. "You know her memory is failing. You know she is declining. We discussed this. I am a medical professional." Chloe, Dr. Evans replied stiffly, reciting the lines I had silently drilled into him with my stare. "The examination results are undeniable. Your mother-in-law is perfectly fine. I have provided her with a certified document stating exactly that. Have a good day." Dr. Evans turned around and walked back into his private office, shutting the heavy oak door firmly behind him and leaving David and Chloe stranded in the lobby with their entire world collapsing around them. I looked up at David, widening my eyes to project an aura of innocent relief. "Oh, David," I whispered, clasping my hands together. "Is that not wonderful news? I was so worried my mind was slipping, but the nice doctor says I am completely healthy. We do not have to worry about any complicated legal arrangements after all." David looked like he was going to vomit. His face had drained of all color, matching the white marble floor beneath our feet. He stared at the closed office door, the realization washing over him that his guaranteed medical trap had just spectacularly failed. He had no control over my money, and the violent creditors were still coming for his blood. "That is great, Mom," David choked out. The words sounded like shattered glass in his throat. "Really great. Let us just go home." The ride back to my house was silent until David finally spoke in a low voice to Chloe, believing I had fallen asleep in the back seat. He said the medical route was finished, that they would use the forged deed, and that he would attempt a wire transfer from my main account on Friday while I was at church. The microphone hidden in the lining of my purse recorded every word. I kept my eyes closed and let my head rest against the window until they dropped me at home. 20 minutes later, I met Leo in my car 2 blocks away and played the recording through his tablet. David's plan gave us exactly 48 hours. Leo warned that a forged power of attorney could still create chaos even if the bank eventually froze the transfer. I told him we would not merely block David. We would feed him a target, control the location, and record the attempt from beginning to end. Friday, we had exactly 48 hours before they attempted to drain every liquid asset I possessed. Leo looked up from the glowing screen, his jaw set in a hard, grim line. "They are accelerating the timeline," he said quietly, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and disgust. "If he initiates a wire transfer with a forged absolute power of attorney, the bank might freeze it eventually, but the initial damage will be catastrophic. They could route the money through offshore accounts before the fraud department even wakes up." I stared out the windshield into the dark suburban street. In the cutthroat world of corporate property acquisitions, I had faced aggressive developers who tried to force quick illegal closures using shadow companies and intimidation tactics. The countermeasure was never to panic. The countermeasure was to feed their greed until they choked on it. You do not try to outrun a starving wolf. You give the starving wolf a piece of poisoned meat and you let them swallow it whole. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life, breaking the heavy silence of the car. "We are going to let him try to steal the money," I told my grandson, steering the vehicle back onto the main road. "But we are going to dictate exactly where he goes to steal it, and we are going to make sure he walks into a vault he cannot walk out of." We drove to a 24-hour corporate printing center on the commercial edge of town. I needed a specific environment and high-end equipment to manufacture a flawless lie. For 40 years, I had analyzed, audited, and deconstructed complex financial portfolios for multi-million-dollar commercial properties. I knew the exact typography, watermarks, security patterns, and layout protocols of premier banking institutions. I rented a private, secure computer terminal in the back corner of the store and went to work. I logged into a professional design program and began crafting a counterfeit bank statement. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction. I used my actual bank heading the correct corporate logos and my real account routing numbers to ensure it passed a cursory inspection by anyone who had previously snooped through my mail. However, I radically altered the status and location of the funds. I created a highly detailed, convincing ledger showing that my entire liquid fortune, the millions they desperately needed to satisfy their violent, impatient creditors, was completely locked in an irrevocable 30-day certificate of deposit. I added bold penalty clauses stating that any attempt to wire or withdraw the funds prior to maturation would trigger an automatic federal fraud freeze and a massive monetary penalty. If David read this document, he would instantly realize his Friday wire transfer plan was a dead end. But cornered, greedy people need immediate hope to keep moving forward, or else they resort to unpredictable violence. I had to provide a new target. I had to leave a golden breadcrumb. At the very bottom of the fabricated statement, under a section labeled Physical Holding Assets, I added a distinct line item detailing a joint safety deposit box. I valued the contents of this fictitious box at roughly $3 million, categorizing the assets as untraceable bearer bonds and antique heirloom jewelry. I printed the false document on heavy, expensive cream paper, folded it exactly 3 times to mimic a standard envelope crease, and slid it into my purse. Our next stop was an all-night hardware store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I walked down the deserted aisles. I purchased a heavy, generic brass padlock key. It was entirely unremarkable. Before getting back into the car, I knelt on the asphalt parking lot and forcefully scraped the surface of the brass key against the rough pavement, scuffing the metal to make it look old, frequently handled, and highly important. We returned to my dark house just past midnight. The air inside felt thick, toxic, and heavy with anticipation. I placed the forged bank statement carelessly on the kitchen island, leaving it half open and jutting out from underneath a stack of mundane grocery store flyers and utility bills. It had to look like a careless, accidental mistake from an elderly woman whose mind was failing her. I placed the scratched brass key directly on top of the financial document, ensuring it rested squarely on the line item mentioning the bearer bonds. It was a beacon, a shiny, irresistible, immediate solution to all of David's catastrophic problems. Leo retreated to his hidden network station deep in the pantry, pulling up the exterior motion sensor cameras on his tablet. I walked slowly upstairs to my bedroom, leaving the door cracked open just an inch, and sat in an armchair in the absolute darkness. The waiting was an agonizing psychological test of endurance. Every settling floorboard, every gust of wind rattling the window panes sounded like an intruder. At 2:45 in the morning, the blue light of my cell phone flashed silently on my lap. It was a network alert from Leo, motion detected on the front porch. I slipped out of the armchair and moved silently to the landing, pressing my back against the wall, peering down into the shadowed foyer below. The heavy front door lock clicked. The deadbolt slid back with a soft, metallic scrape. My own son was breaking into the house I had raised him in, intending to steal my life so he could save his own. David moved through the downstairs hallway, utilizing a small, narrow-beam flashlight. He was not walking normally. He moved with the frantic, jerky urgency of a desperate thief, his breathing fast and shallow. He bypassed the living room and formal dining room, entirely heading straight for the kitchen, hunting for any scrap of financial leverage he could find before the morning. I held my breath, gripping the wooden banister so tightly my joints burned. Through the heavy darkness, I watched the narrow white beam of his flashlight sweep frantically across the marble surface of the kitchen island. The beam stopped dead. It illuminated the corner of the heavy cream paper sticking out from the junk mail. I watched my son snatch the document with greedy, grasping fingers. The loud rustle of the thick paper echoed sharply in the quiet house. He stood completely still in the center of the kitchen for 3 long, agonizing minutes, reading the complex financial lies I had carefully constructed. I could almost physically feel the panic washing over him as he read the clauses about the locked certificate of deposit, realizing his Friday wire transfer plan was completely ruined. But then the flashlight beam dropped lower. It hit the scuffed brass key resting on the dark marble. David let out a low, shaky breath. It was a pathetic, ragged sound of pure desperation meeting sudden, overwhelming salvation. He folded the fake statement and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of his dark jacket. He scooped up the brass key, turning it over in his hand, feeling the cold, hard weight of his promised millions. He turned around, shut off his flashlight, and walked swiftly out the front door, slipping back into the cold suburban night. He had swallowed the hook completely. I truly believed this money was waiting in a steel box downtown, and he believed he held the only key to unlock it. The next morning dawned with a harsh, uncompromising light. I did not go to the bank. I stayed in my kitchen, sipping a cup of hot black coffee, watching the wall clock tick methodically toward 9. I did not need to be physically present to spring the trap. I had already made a very specific, highly confidential phone call to the regional branch manager, a meticulous, fiercely loyal man named Marcus Thorne, who had managed my commercial real estate holding accounts for over 2 decades. Marcus also arranged a secure silent video feed to my tablet so I could watch the transaction from my kitchen without appearing at the branch. At exactly 9:15, the secure feed showed David walking through the towering polished glass doors of First National Bank downtown. He wore his absolute best-tailored charcoal suit, projecting the arrogant, unshakable confidence of a wealthy heir officially taking control of his family legacy. He carried a sleek leather briefcase containing the fraudulent absolute power of attorney he had meticulously forged in my office 2 days prior, and the scratched brass key he had stolen from my kitchen counter. I watched him approach the main teller station, his face carefully arranged in an expression of somber, burdened duty. He presented the forged legal document to the senior teller, explaining with a perfectly practiced heavy sigh that his mother's cognitive health had suffered a sudden catastrophic collapse overnight. He declared, using sharp legal terminology he had likely memorized from the internet, that he required immediate, unrestricted access to her safety deposit box to retrieve vital medical directives and liquidate family assets for her ongoing neurological care. The teller, following the strict, uncompromising instructions she had been given by Marcus Thorne during their early morning security briefing, offered a warm, highly sympathetic nod. She examined the forged power of attorney, scanning the fake notary stamp with practiced, unblinking eyes. She did not flag the document. She did not call for the armed security guard stationed near the entrance. She simply smiled a polite, corporate smile and asked David to please follow her toward the rear of the bank. On the live feed, David walked confidently across the gleaming marble floor, his polished leather shoes echoing loudly in the quiet, cavernous lobby. He undoubtedly believed he was a master manipulator, executing a flawless, unstoppable financial coup. He followed the teller through the heavy, ornate steel gate that separated the public banking lobby from the highly secure, restricted vault area. The camera inside the vault showed an impenetrable room was an impenetrable fortress of thick, reinforced concrete and gleaming stainless steel boxes lining the walls from floor to ceiling. The air inside was climate-controlled cool and smelled distinctly of aged paper and old money. The teller directed David toward the back wall, gesturing to box number 412. It was a massive premium unit strictly reserved for the bank's most exclusive corporate clients. She inserted her master banking guard key into the left side of the complex dual lock mechanism and turned it with a sharp click. She stepped backward, maintaining a respectful distance, gesturing politely for David to complete the access process. David stepped forward, his heart undoubtedly hammering violently against his ribs. The ruthless, violent creditors demanding $450,000 were breathing down his neck. The fake safety deposit box was his absolute final remaining path to survival. He slid the scratched generic brass key into the right side of the lock. It slid in perfectly. It turned with a satisfying heavy mechanical click. The trap I had coordinated with Marcus Thorne was an absolute masterpiece of logistical misdirection. The brass key David held did not open a box full of untraceable bearer bonds or priceless heirloom jewelry. It opened a box that I had specifically rented 3 hours earlier, utilizing a matching generic lock cylinder. I watched David grip the handle and pulled the heavy steel drawer from the concrete wall. He carried the long metal container to the private illuminated viewing table, situated directly in the center of the vault room. He unlatched the heavy metal lid and threw it open fully, expecting to find a massive fortune that would instantly erase his catastrophic debts and fund his wife's endless greedy ambition. There were no untraceable bonds. There was no sparkling antique jewelry. The large, deep steel box was completely empty, save for a single piece of heavy white stationery resting dead in the center of the metal floor. David stared down into the empty void, his mind entirely unable to process the absolute devastating failure of his master scheme. His hands trembled violently as he reached down into the box and picked up the single piece of paper. He unfolded it with jerky, panicked movements. Written across the exact center of the page, in my precise, unmistakable, commanding handwriting, was a single devastating sentence. "A forged signature will not unlock a locked door. Before David could even fully comprehend the terrifying reality of those 9 words, a heavy metallic slam echoed violently through the secure room. "On my screen!" David spun around, dropping the handwritten note onto the viewing table. The massive reinforced solid steel door of the vault room had swung completely shut. The heavy electronic deadbolt engaged instantly with a loud final echoing click, sounding exactly like a prison cell slamming shut. Standing securely on the other side of the thick, bulletproof glass observation window built into the vault door was Marcus Thorne, the bank manager, flanked by a uniformed, highly alert armed security guard. Marcus looked directly at David through the reinforced glass, his expression completely devoid of any customer service warmth or professional courtesy. He held a black telephone receiver tightly to his ear. He was not calling the fraud department to authorize a massive wire transfer. I was dialing the local police precinct to report a felony bank fraud in progress. The game was entirely over. The financial bait had been swallowed, the tactical switch had been flawlessly executed, and the arrogant predator was now entirely inescapably locked inside the cage. What happened next came to me through 2 sources: Marcus's security report and the audio feed Leo had left active on the home network. I watched the bank recording first. David felt the sudden violent urge to vomit. The brilliant foolproof plan he had constructed with Chloe was evaporating into thin air, replaced by the terrifying reality of a federal prison sentence. He watched Marcus slowly lower the black telephone receiver to its cradle. The bank manager gestured to the guard, and a moment later the electronic deadbolt clicked loudly. The heavy door swung open just enough to allow Marcus and the guard to step inside. They blocked the only exit. David Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for the Sterling family. "We have a very serious problem here today. Our legal department reviewed the absolute power of attorney you submitted this morning. The document triggered several immediate security protocols. The notary seal is not registered to any active professional in this state, and the signature analysis software flagged a 98% probability of forgery." David swallowed hard, tasting pure panic. His mind raced frantically, searching for any possible exit strategy. He knew that if he admitted to manufacturing the document, he would leave this building in handcuffs. The violent private creditors demanding $450,000 would find him in a holding cell and tear him apart. He had to pivot. He had to lie with absolute conviction. He let the piece of paper drop from his hands to the metal viewing table. He widened his eyes, forcing a look of utter, devastating confusion onto his face. He let his shoulders slump, adopting the posture of a deeply concerned, overwhelmed son. "Marcus, I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," David stammered, making sure his voice cracked perfectly. "My mother has been declining so rapidly this week. Her memory is completely failing her. She hired a new estate lawyer she found online to expedite this paperwork because she was terrified of losing her assets to a scam. I just picked this envelope up from her kitchen counter this morning. She told me the new lawyer had notarized everything last night. Are you telling me the man she hired is a fraud?" Marcus stared at him. The bank manager had survived 3 decades in the financial sector by learning how to read liars. He did not look convinced. He looked at the empty metal box, then back at David. "If your mother hired a fraudulent attorney," Marcus said slowly, "then we need to contact the authorities immediately to protect her remaining assets. The police are already on their way to take a report regarding this forged submission. You will need to explain this entire situation to them." David felt a cold sweat break out across his back. He leaned heavily against the metal table, rubbing his temples to simulate a man breaking under extreme family stress. "Of course, Marcus. I will tell them everything I know. We need to find this lawyer. My poor mother is so confused she probably paid him an exorbitant fee. I cannot believe someone would take advantage of an elderly widow like this." For the next 45 minutes, David sat in a small, windowless office near the lobby, repeating his fabricated story to 2 skeptical police officers. He played the role of the innocent, trusting son flawlessly. He provided a fake physical description of the supposed lawyer, claimed he had never met the man personally, and insisted he was only trying to follow his mother's erratic instructions to secure her medical directives. Because the bank had not actually lost any funds, and because Clara herself was not present to contradict the story, the officers eventually let him leave. They confiscated the forged power of attorney as evidence and warned him that a detective would be following up. David walked out of the bank and into the bright morning sunlight. He did not feel relieved. He felt like a man walking toward a firing squad. He got into his luxury sedan, locked the doors, and rested his forehead against the leather steering wheel. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely insert the key into the ignition. His cell phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. It was not Chloe. It was a restricted number. He answered it, his throat painfully dry. "Hello." A man spoke on the other end. The voice was calm, raspy, and terrifyingly polite. "David, this is your final courtesy call. The grace period expired at midnight. We understand you attempted a transaction at First National this morning. We also understand you walked out empty-handed. Our patience is completely gone. You have exactly 3 days to provide $450,000. If the funds are not wired by Sunday evening, we will no longer be contacting you by phone. We will visit your wife at her boutique. We will visit your home. Do you understand the severity of your situation?" "Yes," David choked out. "I understand. I am securing the funds. Just give me the 3 days." Later that morning, Leo and I listened to the audio captured in David and Chloe's kitchen. David returned from the bank in a panic and admitted that the power of attorney had been flagged. The safety deposit box was a setup, and he had barely talked his way out of immediate arrest. On the recording, Chloe's confidence collapsed when he told her the creditors had given them 3 days. She paced the kitchen, terrified of losing the house, the boutique, and her social standing. David shouted that I had left a note in the box and knew about the forged notary stamp. Then Chloe's fear hardened into a new plan. I know that David snapped, but we have no options left. She locked the real money in an irrevocable trust. The lawyer told me that weeks ago. We cannot touch it legally, and we cannot touch it illegally. She has completely outsmarted us. The microphone captured Chloe stopping in the middle of the kitchen. Her voice became quiet and calculating. She said I had defeated them in private because private negotiations were my territory. Therefore, they would drag me into public and use my reputation against me. Chloe stopped pacing. She turned to face her husband, her eyes narrowing into dark, calculating slits. The panic was still there, but it was rapidly being consumed by a cold, vicious determination. "No," Chloe said softly. "She outsmarted you when you tried to play a quiet, secret game. Your mother thrives in the shadows. She thrives on private negotiations and hidden leverage. So we do not play privately anymore. We drag her out into the blinding light." "What are you talking about?" David asked. "Your 40th birthday is this Saturday." Chloe explained, her voice gaining speed and volume as the new plan solidified in her mind. "We have already booked the grand ballroom at the Oak Ridge Country Club. We have 150 guests confirmed. The mayor will be there. Your corporate partners will be there. And most importantly, those private creditors watching us will see exactly what kind of wealth we have access to." David shook his head in absolute disbelief. "Chloe, we cannot afford to host a lavish party right now. The catering bill alone is $20,000. The credit cards are maxed out. We are facing physical violence and you want to throw a birthday party." "We are going to use the party to corner her," Chloe insisted, stepping closer and grabbing his shoulders. "Your mother cares about one thing above all else, her pristine social reputation. She spent 40 years building her image as a respected, generous matriarch in this city. She would never cause a public scandal in front of the most powerful people in town. I still do not understand how a party gets us the money we need to survive." "We do not ask her for it," Chloe said, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "We announce it. We hire a legitimate public notary to attend the party disguised as a guest. During the main toast, you get up on stage. You give a tear-jerking speech about how much you love her, how her health is failing, and how she has generously decided to pass her legacy down to her only son tonight. We present the asset transfer documents right there on the stage. We put a pen in her hand while 150 people are clapping and cheering for her generosity." David stared at his wife, slowly realizing the sheer sociopathic brilliance of the strategy. It was social extortion on a massive scale. If Clara refused to sign the documents on stage, she would humiliate herself and her son in front of the entire city. She would look like a cruel, erratic, selfish old woman ruining her son's milestone birthday. She would be forced to sign just to save face, and once the legitimate notary stamped the transfer in front of a room full of witnesses, the assets would legally belong to them. "It is the perfect trap," Chloe whispered, her eyes shining with toxic ambition. "She cannot outmaneuver us if we surround her with an audience. She will sign the estate over just to avoid a public meltdown. The creditors will see the transfer happen live. They will know the money is secured and they will back off. We win everything, David. We just have to make sure she shows up." "I will not be able to convince her to come," David said quietly. Not after what happened at the bank today. She knows I tried to rob her. She will not answer my calls. Then I will handle the invitation, Chloe replied, smoothing the lapels of her silk robe. I will play the dutiful daughter-in-law who knows absolutely nothing about your little banking mistake. I will go to her house tomorrow and give her an invitation she cannot possibly refuse. The following afternoon, Chloe parked her luxury SUV in my driveway. Through the front window, I watched her check her reflection, apply lipstick, and practice the gentle smile she used whenever she wanted something. She carried a box of imported chocolates to my porch and rang the bell. I walked up the porch steps and rang the doorbell, adopting an expression of light, eager anticipation. A few moments later, I opened the door in a simple knit sweater, my posture slightly stooped and my expression pleasantly uncertain. "Chloe," I said softly, "what a pleasant surprise. David is not with you." "Oh, Clara," Chloe cooed, stepping forward and wrapping me in a fragrant hug. David was supposedly trapped at the office, and she had come alone because she wanted to see me. She held up the chocolates and asked to come inside. "Of course, dear. Please come sit in the living room. I was just reading a book." I stepped back and allowed her into the living room. As she walked ahead, my fragile smile disappeared for a heartbeat. Then I restored it, followed her inside, and settled into my armchair while she perched on the edge of the sofa. "Clara, I am here because I need a massive favor from you." Chloe began, leaning forward and placing a warm hand over my knee. She reminded me that David's 40th birthday gala was scheduled for Saturday at the Oak Ridge Country Club and said all his friends and colleagues would be there. "That sounds wonderful," I murmured in a soft, wavering voice. I told her David deserved a celebration, but large crowds, noise, and bright lights had become difficult for me. Chloe squeezed my knee gently. "You absolutely have to be there, Clara. You are the guest of honor. David would be completely heartbroken if his own mother missed his 40th birthday. We have a special seat right next to the stage reserved just for you. You will not have to mingle or exert yourself at all. Just sit back, enjoy the beautiful catering, and watch your son be celebrated." I looked down at my hands and pretended to waver. After the bank failure, they were out of quiet options. The gala was not a celebration. It was a public ambush. Well, I hesitated, letting out a tired sigh. "If it means that much to David, I suppose I can manage a few hours. I will come." "Oh, thank you, Clara," Chloe exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine greedy relief. "It is going to be the most important night of David's life." Chloe stood up to leave, smoothing her expensive skirt. She paused near the archway, turning back with a look of mild, fabricated embarrassment. "Oh, I almost forgot. The country club management is being terribly difficult about the final catering gratuity. They refuse to let me put the tip on my credit card, and they require a physical check for the staff on the night of the event. My checkbook is completely out of order right now. Would you be an absolute angel and bring your checkbook to the party, just to help cover the tip? We will reimburse you on Monday, I promise." I smiled warmly while the final piece clicked into place. Asking me to bring a checkbook confirmed that the invitation was tied to a financial performance. They intended to put documents in front of me and use the crowd as pressure. "Of course, Chloe," I said sweetly. "I will bring my checkbook. I am always happy to help my family cover the costs." "You are the best mother-in-law in the world," Chloe said, blowing a kiss before turning and walking out the front door. I stood in the quiet living room until Chloe's SUV disappeared. Then I straightened, walked to my secure office, and called Jonathan Vance on his private line. He answered on the second ring. "Jonathan," I said in the same commanding tone I had used through 4 decades of commercial real estate negotiations, "the trap is set. They are going to coerce me publicly at the country club on Saturday. They believe an audience will make me surrender." "What do you need me to do?" Clara, Jonathan asked, his tone shifting into absolute professional combat mode. I told him to coordinate with Lieutenant Miller and the investigators already reviewing the forged power of attorney. They were to wait outside the ballroom until my signal, then execute the warrant supported by the bank evidence and my security footage. I also told Jonathan to finalize the foreclosure documents through the proxy company that had purchased David and Chloe's defaulted mortgage debt. "Consider it done," Jonathan replied. "Are you sure you want to handle the confrontation yourself?" I looked toward the street and smiled. They wanted a public spectacle and a helpless victim on a stage. I intended to give them the spectacle, but not the victim. I told Jonathan to prepare every document. It was time to drop the hammer. The Oak Ridge Country Club stood as a towering monument to old money and carefully guarded social status. Massive stone pillars framed the grand entrance, and the sweeping circular driveway was packed end to end with imported luxury vehicles. I sat quietly in the passenger seat of my understated, reliable sedan, while Leo navigated the busy valet line. For nearly 4 decades, I had attended corporate galas, charity dinners, and high-stakes negotiation banquets in venues exactly like this one. I knew the specific, unmistakable scent of expensive floor wax mixed with high-end perfume and roasted garlic. I knew exactly how to read the subtle, unspoken hierarchy of the room simply by observing who was seated near the main stage and who was relegated to the drafty, dark corners near the kitchen doors. Tonight, David and Chloe had spared absolutely no expense to maintain their fragile, crumbling illusion of wealth. They had rented the grand ballroom, a massive space that easily commanded $20,000 just to unlock the front doors. It was a spectacular, aggressive display of financial suicide for a couple currently drowning in a sea of toxic debt. I stepped out of the passenger side, leaning heavily on Leo for physical support. My grandson wore a sharp, dark suit, his posture rigid and incredibly protective. He offered his arm, and I took it deliberately, letting my hand tremble just enough to be noticeable to anyone watching us arrive. We walked slowly through the towering glass doors and stepped into the dazzling, blinding light of the crystal chandeliers. The grand ballroom was packed with 150 carefully selected guests. Local politicians, wealthy business owners, and country club socialites mingled near the open bars, laughing and drinking expensive champagne. But my highly trained eyes immediately bypassed the glittering gowns and tailored suits to scan the crowd for the anomalies. It took me less than 30 seconds to spot them hiding in plain sight. Scattered strategically around the perimeter of the room were several men in suits that fit poorly, men who did not drink the expensive alcohol or engage in the polite, easy small talk. They stood near the emergency exits, their cold eyes fixed intensely on David. These were the private creditors, the violent, unapologetic creditors who had given my son until Sunday night to produce $450,000. David had arrogantly invited his own executioners to his birthday party to prove to them that he was about to successfully secure my vast estate. Leo guided me with gentle hands to a reserved table situated directly next to the main stage. The placement was an entirely deliberate tactical choice, ensuring I would be the absolute center of attention when the trap was finally sprung. We sat down in the plush chairs, and the heavy, charged silence between us spoke volumes. We were 2 heavily armed soldiers, sitting calmly in the middle of a massive minefield, patiently waiting for the enemy to blindly step on their own buried explosives. Directly across the crowded room, Chloe was performing the absolute role of her life. She wore a glittering emerald gown that exposed her shoulders, moving gracefully from table to table with a practiced, tragic elegance. I watched her lean in close to the city mayor, a powerful man I had personally funded during his difficult first campaign many years ago. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and spoke in a loud, carrying whisper, designed specifically to cut easily through the ambient noise of the room. She told him it had been such a difficult, agonizing season for our entire family. She said, "Clara is declining so rapidly it breaks my heart to watch her brilliant mind slip away from us day by day." She sighed heavily, pouring herself a fresh glass of robust red wine and declaring loudly that David was bravely preparing to take over all the complex family finances so his poor mother could finally rest without suffering any more terrible confusion. It was a brilliant, highly vicious strategy of public social conditioning. She was preemptively validating the extortion by actively planting the seed of my supposed cognitive incompetence in the minds of every powerful, connected person in the city. If I tried to protest or fight back later tonight, I would merely look like a confused, agitated medical patient, aggressively resisting the loving help of her devoted family. I sat quietly at my table, staring blankly at the massive floral centerpiece, projecting an aura of total bewildered fragility. Inside my chest, the fiery volcanic rage was completely suppressed by a cold, calculating anticipation. In cutthroat commercial real estate negotiations, when a desperate opponent tries to back you into a corner using a public audience to force compliance, you never interrupt their presentation. You remain completely silent, and you let them build their towering house of cards as high as physically possible, so the inevitable collapse is absolute and completely irrecoverable. Dinner was a lavish, agonizingly slow affair consisting of roasted beef tenderloin and imported truffles. David sat 2 tables away from me, sweating profusely despite the heavy industrial air conditioning blasting through the ballroom. He drank his whiskey far too quickly, his eyes constantly darting nervously toward the exits, where his aggressive creditors waited silently in the shadows. The massive balloon payment was due in exactly 24 hours. The sheer crushing pressure of his catastrophic failure was radiating from him like heat from a blast furnace. He was a desperate man standing on the very edge of a sheer cliff, preparing to throw his own mother over the side just to buy himself another 24 hours of social survival. I deliberately knocked my heavy silver salad fork off the edge of the table, letting it clatter loudly against the polished hardwood floor. Chloe rushed over immediately, her face a perfect mask of sickeningly sweet condescension and fake worry. She picked up the fork and patted my shoulder loudly, asking if my hands were feeling numb again, and suggesting I drink some plain water to calm my failing nerves. I offered a wavering, pathetic apology, letting my voice crack perfectly on the final syllable. The wealthy guests seated at the tables around us exchanged heavy looks of profound pity. The illusion was absolutely flawless. I was a completely helpless old woman, and my loving, capable family was stepping up to manage my tragic, undeniable decline. Leo reached under the table linen and squeezed my wrist, his grip ironclad and perfectly steady. The silent physical communication was crystal clear to both of us. The trap was fully set, and the bait had been taken. The overhead lights slowly dimmed, signaling the end of the lavish meal service. A single bright spotlight illuminated the main stage, cutting through the darkness of the ballroom. David stood up abruptly, adjusting his silk tie, and walked up the short flight of wooden stairs toward the microphone stand. The packed room immediately fell into a polite, expectant silence. He tapped the microphone, sending a low, heavy thump echoing through the massive space. "Thank you all for coming tonight," David began, his voice echoing loudly over the speaker system. He sounded completely composed and confident, but I could clearly see the subtle, frantic tremor in his hands gripping the edges of the wooden podium. Turning 40 is a major milestone in any man's life, but tonight is not really about me at all. It is about family. It is about honoring the incredible people who built the solid foundation we stand on today. He launched smoothly into a tear-jerking, highly rehearsed monologue about my late husband and the massive sacrifices we had made to build a successful, beautiful life. He spoke passionately about my strength and my boundless maternal love, painting a vivid picture of an idyllic childhood that had never actually existed in reality. The country club socialites cooed with genuine deep emotion, wiping their eyes gently with expensive linen napkins. The violent creditors standing by the back doors leaned forward slightly, their predatory instincts recognizing that the money was finally about to change hands. Then David shifted his tone masterfully. His voice dropped, adopting a heavy, somber cadence that demanded absolute attention. "But time is cruel to all of us," he continued, looking down at the podium with manufactured sadness. "And watching the strongest, bravest woman I know begin to lose her daily battle with her own memory has been the absolute hardest challenge of my entire life. My mother has always been a titan, a brilliant, sharp mind, but lately the deep confusion and the overwhelming stress of managing her vast affairs has simply become a crushing, unbearable burden for her fragile health." He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, completely fabricated sorrow. "And that is why tonight my mother has decided to give me the greatest, most meaningful birthday gift a son could ever possibly ask for. She has decided to officially pass the heavy torch. She wants to ensure our family legacy is protected and secure by transferring the full management of her entire estate to me, so she can finally live out her remaining years in absolute peace and comfort without worrying about a single financial detail ever again." The crowd erupted into warm, incredibly supportive applause. It was the ultimate, flawlessly executed social ambush. He had successfully painted the hostile asset theft as a generous, loving act of family succession. If I refused to sign the documents right now in front of everyone, I would publicly humiliate my only son on his 40th birthday and expose myself as a bitter, irrational old woman, ruining a beautiful moment. It was pure, brutal extortion deliberately disguised as a heartfelt celebration. David smiled broadly, motioning smoothly toward the darkened side of the stage. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out from the shadows carrying a thick, heavy leather binder. "And to make absolutely sure everything is handled properly and legally tonight, we have invited a certified notary public to witness this beautiful family moment," David announced, his voice dripping with triumphant confidence. "Mom, Please come up here and join me," he said, extending his hand warmly toward my table. "Let us make this official in front of all the wonderful people who love and support us." The applause swelled, echoing loudly against the high vaulted ceilings. Chloe stood up from her table, clapping enthusiastically, her face glowing with triumphant, unadulterated greed. The trap had slammed completely shut. They fully expected me to shuffle slowly up those wooden stairs, weeping with genuine confusion, and sign away millions of dollars, just to escape the blinding, harsh spotlight and the crushing, inescapable social pressure of the room. I did not shuffle. I pushed back my heavy dining chair and stood up. I did not lean on Leo for physical support or guidance. The calculated, pathetic tremor in my hands vanished instantly, replaced by an absolute rock-solid stillness that commanded immediate attention. I smoothed the front of my elegant designer dress and walked deliberately toward the stage. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders thrown back, my chin held high and firm. The fragile, bewildered aura I had projected all evening evaporated into thin air, leaving behind the commanding, ruthless, undeniable presence of a woman who had spent 4 decades completely dominating aggressive corporate boardrooms. I climbed the stairs with deliberate, highly measured steps, my expensive leather heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the hollow wood. I walked directly past the confused, waiting notary public and stepped right up to the wooden podium. David offered me a fake, overly reassuring smile, holding out an expensive silver pen and pushing a thick stack of complex legal documents toward me. At the top of the pristine page in bold, undeniable black letters were the words, "Absolute power of attorney and irrevocable asset transfer." The massive ballroom fell absolutely, totally silent, waiting breathlessly for the sweet, tired old lady to sign away her entire life and fortune. I did not take the silver pen. I placed both of my hands flat on the outer edges of the podium, leaning slightly into the microphone. I looked down at the fraudulent legal documents specifically designed to strip me of my dignity, my independence, and my beautiful home. Then I looked out at the vast sea of wealthy, expectant faces staring blindly back at me. I located Chloe standing near the front tables, her triumphant, arrogant smile beginning to falter just slightly as she registered the sudden, drastic change in my physical posture. I located the violent, impatient creditors waiting silently near the back doors, their arms crossed over their chests. And finally, I turned my head slowly and looked directly into my son's panicked, rapidly sweating face. I let out a sharp, clear, booming laugh that silenced the entire ballroom. The microphone felt cold and heavy in my steady hand. For a fleeting, breathless second, the grand ballroom remained trapped in a suffocating silence, waiting for the frail, confused widow to weep with gratitude and blindly sign away her life. I looked down at the thick stack of papers resting on the wooden podium. I did not reach for the expensive silver pen David had so eagerly pushed toward my trembling fingers. Instead, I took a deep breath, looked out over the sea of expectant faces, and let out a sharp, clear, booming laugh. The sound echoed through the massive professional speakers, cutting through the thick, pretentious atmosphere of the country club like a freshly honed steel blade. It was not the wavering, uncertain chuckle of a frightened elderly woman. It was a laugh born in cutthroat boardrooms. It was a sound I had meticulously perfected over 40 years of dismantling arrogant corporate raiders and predatory developers who thought they could easily outsmart me. I felt the physical transformation take hold of my entire body. The stooped, exhausted shoulders I had meticulously maintained all evening snapped back. My spine straightened into a rigid, uncompromising line, adding 2 inches to my posture. The manufactured, pathetic tremor in my fingers vanished instantly, replaced by a terrifying, rock-solid stillness. I lifted my chin and surveyed the crowd of 150 wealthy guests, local politicians, and hidden loan sharks. The sweet, lost grandmother they thought they were watching simply evaporated into thin air, replaced entirely by the ruthless real estate broker they had foolishly forgotten about. I looked directly at my son. The blood was already beginning to drain rapidly from David's flushed face. The triumphant, greedy gleam in his eyes fractured, replaced by the very first spark of genuine cold terror. He recognized that posture. He recognized that laugh. I adjusted the microphone stand, pulling it closer to my mouth with a swift, confident motion. "Let us read this incredibly generous family legacy document together, shall we?" I announced. My voice was no longer a soft, confused whisper. It rang out with absolute undeniable authority bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the high vaulted ceiling. I picked up the first page of the legal packet and held it up to the blinding stage lights. Section 4, paragraph 2. I read, enunciating every single syllable with crystal clarity. The grantor. Clara hereby surrenders absolute irrevocable power of attorney to David, including immediate uncontested rights to liquidate, transfer, or seize all real estate holdings, banking assets, and blind trusts without notification, oversight, or consent. A heavy, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the front tables. The city mayor, sitting just 10 feet away from the stage, set his champagne glass down on the tablecloth with a sharp clink. I did not stop. I turned to the second page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon I had spent decades tearing apart in multi-million-dollar commercial property negotiations. And here we have the medical directives. I continued, my tone dripping with icy, unvarnished disdain. This specific section grants my son the unilateral, unquestionable authority to commit me to a state-run assisted living facility and immediately sell my primary residence to cover the costs of his own outstanding personal debts. I lowered the heavy paper and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. This is not a legacy document. This is a hostile asset seizure deliberately disguised as a birthday present. David finally broke out of his paralyzed stupor. The devastating, undeniable reality of his public exposure crashed into him, shattering his carefully constructed facade of the devoted, burdened son. Absolute panic seized his features. "Mom, stop it right now! You are confused!" he shouted, his voice cracking with raw desperation. He lunged across the stage, his arm outstretched, desperately trying to grab the microphone from my hand. He intended to physically silence me, to drag me away from the podium, and loudly claim my mind had completely snapped under the pressure. I never even made it past the wooden podium. A dark, solid figure stepped out from the deep shadows of the stage wing, moving with incredible speed and unwavering purpose. It was Leo. My 17-year-old grandson planted his feet firmly between me and his frantic father. He did not say a single word. He simply raised both of his hands and shoved David backward with a sudden, shocking physical force. David stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished wood floor. He caught himself before falling, completely staring at his own son in utter, wide-eyed disbelief. "Leo, get out of the way. Your grandmother is having a severe medical episode," David ordered, trying to sound authoritative but only sounding weak and terrified. Leo stood like a stone fortress, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. He crossed his arms over his chest, physically shielding me from the man who had raised him. "I am not moving a single inch," Leo stated, his voice ringing loud and clear enough for the first few rows of tables to hear perfectly. "Let her finish her speech." I looked at my brave grandson, feeling a profound surge of familial pride before giving him a single, barely perceptible nod. This was the exact signal we had agreed upon during our careful planning. Leo reached into the inner pocket of his dark suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. He did not call the police. He did not text anyone. He simply tapped a single pre-programmed button on the glowing screen. He had spent the entire afternoon sitting in the empty ballroom, effortlessly bypassing the country club's rudimentary network security and gaining total remote access to the advanced audiovisual system. The bright stage lights suddenly cut out, plunging the entire front of the ballroom into deep shadows. A collective, startled gasp rose from the wealthy crowd. Then the massive mechanical gears hidden in the ceiling whined to life. Behind me, the towering white projector screen slowly descended against the back wall of the large stage. David spun around, staring up at the blank canvas descending from above. "What is happening?" he demanded, looking frantically toward the empty AV booth at the back of the room. "Turn the lights back on right now." No one answered his desperate demands. The high-definition projectors mounted high above the crowd flared with a blinding, stark white light. Instead of a nostalgic, tear-jerking slideshow of my son's childhood memories, the massive screens displayed the grainy, green-tinted footage from the hidden security camera Leo had covertly installed in my home office. The bright digital date and timestamp glowing in the bottom corner unequivocally proved the recording was less than a week old. The entire packed ballroom watched in absolute horrified silence as the video began to play. The camera angle looked directly down over my heavy mahogany desk. There sat David hunched intensely over a stack of legal papers. The high-definition footage zoomed in, displaying his illegal actions in crisp, undeniable detail. The stunned crowd watched my son grip a fraudulent notary stamp, slam it onto a black ink pad, and press it firmly onto the bottom of a property quitclaim deed. A low murmur of shock swept through the room as they watched him pull out a canceled check from my stolen mail and meticulously practice forging my signature over and over again on a scrap piece of paper. The visual evidence of a massive federal felony was playing out on a 20-foot screen in front of the most powerful and connected people in the city. I looked out at the captive audience. The polite, refined country club atmosphere was completely annihilated. I watched the faces of David's wealthy friends twist in raw disgust. The mayor was whispering furiously to his wife, shaking his head. But I was specifically watching the men in the poorly fitting suits standing quietly near the exit doors, the private creditors, the violent, unforgiving loan sharks David owed $450,000. The exact moment they saw the video, the precise moment they realized David was attempting a desperate, highly illegal forgery to pay them back, their entire physical demeanor shifted. I watched 3 of them pull their cell phones from their pockets simultaneously. They were not calling the local police. They were reporting back to their bosses that David and Chloe had absolutely no real money, no legitimate legal leverage, and absolutely no way to pay their massive impending balloon payment. The video faded to black, but the presentation was far from over. The massive audio system kicked in. The crystal-clear recording Leo and I had intercepted from the hidden microphone slipped into my purse, filled the cavernous room. It was Chloe's voice. Her arrogant, vicious, greedy tone echoed harshly off the walls for everyone to hear. "David, your mother is 68 years old and grieving." Chloe's recorded voice sneered through the speakers, dripping with utter disdain. "She is exhausted. All we have to do is declare her legally incompetent. We tell a judge she is declining rapidly. We get medical power of attorney and absolute financial control. We put her in a nice, quiet, assisted living facility, and we take over managing the assets. It is for her own good, really. She cannot handle this kind of money." Then came David's recorded response, his voice thick with cold, calculating pragmatism. "The medical route is a bust. We use the forged deed tomorrow. I will initiate the wire transfer from her main account on Friday while she is at church." The audio cut out with a sharp click. The stage lights snapped back on, blindingly bright, illuminating the absolute wreckage of my son's life. The silence in the grand ballroom was incredibly heavy, highly toxic, and completely absolute. The unmasking was total. There was no spinning this narrative. There was no falsely claiming it was a simple familial misunderstanding. They had been caught planning to rob me, drug me with false concern, forge my legal name, and lock me away in a facility, and they had been caught broadcasting it to the entire city. David fell to his knees right there on the hardwood stage. His legs simply gave out under the crushing, suffocating weight of his total public ruin. He buried his face deep in his trembling hands, shaking violently, utterly destroyed by the consequences of his own bottomless greed. From the absolute center of the silent room, a chaotic, frantic movement broke the stillness. Chloe pushed her way violently through the crowd of stunned guests. Her glittering emerald gown looked completely ridiculous now, a cheap, tacky costume on a desperate, cornered woman. The guests physically stepped back to avoid touching her, treating her like she was actively contagious. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged, terrified fury. She marched right up to the edge of the stage, completely ignoring the disgusted stares of the powerful people around her. "You crazy old bat!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill, breathless, and echoing terribly through the quiet room. "You set us up. We are your family. We are trying to survive, and you are trying to destroy us." I looked down at her from the safety of the wooden podium. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic screaming. I did not show a single ounce of pity, fear, or anger. I looked at her with the cold, absolute detachment of a seasoned executive staring at a bad, toxic investment that had just been permanently liquidated. "Family does not forge signatures." "Chloe," I said directly into the microphone, my voice steady, carrying a heavy, undeniable truth that echoed over the crowd. "Family does not carefully scheme to lock their grieving mother in a medical facility just to quietly pay off illegal gambling markers. I paused, letting the devastating, unvarnished truth hang heavily over the silent, staring crowd. I looked at David weeping on the floor, then back to Chloe standing completely frozen in her expensive, meaningless dress. "But do not worry," I continued, my tone shifting effortlessly into a sharp, predatory cadence that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. "I am not just here to embarrass you tonight. I am here to finalize the hostile transaction you so eagerly started." I reached into my small evening purse and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope containing their absolute financial ruin. "Because you see, I am not quite done yet." The heavy silence in the grand ballroom felt like a physical weight pressing down on every person in the room. I remained standing at the wooden podium, the bright stage lights illuminating the absolute wreckage of my son's carefully constructed extortion attempt. The crowd of wealthy socialites and local politicians stared at me in stunned fascination. They had come to this country club expecting to watch a tragic, heartwarming transfer of power from a failing mother to a devoted son. Instead, they were witnessing the brutal, calculated execution of a corporate executioner. I looked down at the fraudulent property transfer documents resting on the podium. I reached out and slowly pushed the papers off the edge, letting them flutter uselessly to the floor. I turned my attention back to the silent room and projected my voice clearly over the sound system. I explained that the agonizing medical decline David had just tearfully described was a complete fabrication. I told the audience that earlier that very week, I had sat across from a board-certified forensic psychiatrist and passed a comprehensive cognitive evaluation with flawless marks. There was no dementia. There was no confusion. There was only a woman who had spent 4 decades negotiating commercial real estate deals with some of the most aggressive predators in the country, and I had instantly recognized a hostile takeover when I saw one. David was still struggling to catch his breath after Leo had shoved him backward. He stood trembling on the stage, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit strategy that no longer existed. I turned to look directly at him and delivered the first devastating blow. I told him he had profoundly underestimated his opponent. I explained that the moment I uncovered his massive hidden debts and his plan to declare me legally incompetent, I had bypassed his traps entirely. I announced to the entire room that 3 days ago I had visited the top estate planning firm in the city. I had taken the $2.5 million inheritance from my late brother, along with every single commercial property, every stock portfolio, and every liquid bank account I owned, and I had permanently transferred them into a blind, irrevocable trust. A collective gasp swept through the front tables. The high-end corporate lawyers and business owners in the audience instantly understood the gravity of those words. I kept my eyes locked on my son and explained the mechanics of his failure. I told him that even if his repulsive public ambush had worked tonight, even if the crushing social pressure had forced me to sign his fraudulent deed in front of this crowd, the paper would have been entirely worthless. The assets no longer belonged to me in any legal capacity that could be seized. The fortress was impenetrable. The wealth was guarded by corporate trustees, and David had been explicitly and permanently excluded from ever accessing a single cent. He had spent his last remaining dollars throwing a lavish country club party to steal a treasure chest that was already completely empty. The realization hit David with the force of a speeding freight train. His face turned a sickly shade of gray, and he stumbled backward against the dark stage curtain. All the forged notary stamps, all the lies, all the calculated manipulation had been completely neutralized by a single visit to a competent attorney. But securing my own wealth was merely a defensive maneuver. In the brutal arena of commercial property acquisitions, you do not just block a desperate predator. You systematically dismantle their ability to hunt. I stepped away from the podium and walked slowly down the wooden stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me immediately, leaving a wide, clear path directly toward the table where Chloe stood frozen in her glittering emerald gown. I reached into my small evening purse and withdrew a thick, heavy manila envelope. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from my daughter-in-law and my son, holding the envelope out between us. David stared at the manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. He raised a shaking hand and took it from my grip. I instructed him to open it. The ballroom was so quiet that the sound of the paper tearing echoed off the high ceiling. David pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents. His eyes scanned the top page and his breathing hitched violently in his throat. I raised my voice so the men standing in the shadows near the back doors could hear me perfectly. I explained to the crowd that desperate people always leave wide-open trails. I told David that my forensic accountants had easily tracked the aggressive private lending firm holding the massive toxic balloon payment on his heavily mortgaged suburban mansion. I knew he was entirely out of time, and I knew his creditors were eager to offload the bad debt for immediate cash. I watched the realization spread across Chloe's face as I revealed my final fatal play. I explained that 1 week ago, utilizing a proxy limited liability company registered out of state, I had purchased his toxic debt entirely. I had bought the mortgage on their pristine, arrogant showcase of a home. And because David had missed his final payment deadline at midnight, the default clauses had been officially activated. I pointed to the documents trembling in his hands and announced that those were formal eviction notices. I told him I was foreclosing on the property immediately. I stated with absolute unyielding coldness that they were entirely bankrupt, completely exposed, and utterly homeless. The beautiful modern farmhouse Chloe loved to flaunt to her country club friends now legally belonged to the very woman she had tried to lock away in a state-run medical facility. Chloe broke completely. The arrogant, composed socialite vanished, replaced by a woman staring directly into the abyss of total social and financial ruin. She collapsed into her dining chair and burst into loud, uncontrollable tears, burying her face in her hands. The wealthy friends she had desperately tried to impress were now staring at her with naked disgust and profound pity. Near the back exits, the poorly dressed loan sharks turned around and quietly slipped out the doors, realizing there was absolutely nothing left to collect. David dropped the eviction notices onto the floor. His legs simply gave out beneath him. He fell heavily to his knees in the middle of the polished ballroom, surrounded by the shattered ruins of his life, grasping at his hair in absolute despair. Then the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swung wide open. The sudden movement drew the attention of every guest in the room. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the venue, their heavy-duty belts jingling and their radios crackling in the quiet space. They walked with steady, undeniable purpose straight down the center aisle toward our table. I explained that Marcus had preserved the forged power of attorney, the bank surveillance, and David's recorded statements. After I provided the home office footage and a sworn statement, investigators obtained an arrest warrant for attempted bank fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. The 2 police officers stopped beside us. They looked at the documents scattered on the floor, then reached down and pulled David up by his expensive suit jacket. They forced his arms behind his back, the heavy steel handcuffs clicking loudly as they locked into place. In front of 150 stunned guests, the officers officially announced that David was under arrest for felony attempted bank fraud, forgery, and identity theft. 3 months had passed since the blinding stage lights of the Oak Ridge Country Club illuminated the absolute destruction of my son. The mild spring air had deepened into the warm stillness of early summer. The grand oak trees lining my street were thick with green leaves, their branches fully exposed to the bright morning light. That same brutal exposure was exactly what David was currently experiencing in a cramped, damp room at the Starlight Motor Inn. It was a miserable, dilapidated building sitting right on the edge of the county line, a place specifically designed for people who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. I knew exactly where he was sleeping every single night because my attorney, Jonathan Vance, received regular detailed updates from the district attorney regarding David's impending federal trial. My son spent his agonizingly long days pacing the stained, faded carpet of room number 12, waiting for a court date that would inevitably end in a mandatory federal prison sentence. He had been forced to trade his custom-tailored Italian suits for cheap generic cotton shirts he bought at a discount store down the highway. The crushing, suffocating weight of his new reality had aged his face 10 years in a matter of 12 short weeks. I was entirely bankrupt, facing multiple felony charges for attempted wire fraud and identity theft, and he was facing it all completely alone. Chloe, of course, did not stay to comfort him in his darkest hour. The absolute moment the steel handcuffs clicked sharply around David's wrists in that grand ballroom, the grand illusion of their devoted, wealthy marriage violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Financial predators are entirely loyal to money, and when the money evaporated into thin air, so did she. I received a detailed, comprehensive report from my forensic accountant outlining her frantic, pathetic exit from the city. Less than 24 hours after the country club disaster, Chloe packed 3 large suitcases full of the expensive designer clothes she had purchased with stolen funds and simply vanished into the night. She abandoned her failing high-end fashion boutique, leaving behind a mountain of unpaid vendor invoices and a stack of furious, threatening voicemails from her former country club friends. She did not visit David in the county holding cell. She did not attend his preliminary bail hearing to offer moral support. She simply cut her massive losses and ran back to a distant relative on the West Coast, completely abandoning the husband she had manipulated and pushed into committing a federal crime. She left him to face the wrath of the justice system and the violent private creditors entirely by himself. The proxy limited liability company I had used to purchase their toxic mortgage debt did not show them a single ounce of mercy. The day after the disastrous birthday party, my aggressive legal team filed the official foreclosure paperwork with the county courthouse. David was legally locked out of the sprawling modern farmhouse he had used to project his fake wealth. I drove past the property once, just to see the bright yellow eviction notice taped securely to the heavy mahogany front door. The sterile white and black mansion was completely empty, hollow, and cold, exactly like the people who used to live inside it. The massive private equity loan sharks who had been hunting David realized he was entirely bankrupt and facing federal prison time. They immediately filed aggressive civil suits against him, attempting to claim whatever pathetic scraps of money he had left in his personal checking accounts. I was fighting a legal war on multiple brutal fronts, and he was losing every single battle. While David suffocated in the consequences of his own bottomless greed, I was sitting comfortably on my wide front porch, wrapped tightly in a light cotton shawl. The warm morning air felt incredibly clean and refreshing against my face. The heavy, oppressive anxiety that had haunted my every step for weeks was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. I held a steaming ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the comforting warmth soak deeply into my palms. For 40 years, I had successfully navigated the treacherous cutthroat waters of commercial real estate, building a massive fortress of wealth and independence. My own flesh and blood had foolishly believed they could easily breach those solid walls by treating me like a senile, helpless victim. They had mistaken my quiet, natural grief for cognitive weakness. They had looked at a woman who survived decades of ruthless corporate negotiations and saw only an easy target. They had paid the absolute ultimate price for their towering arrogance. The heavy oak front door clicked open behind me, and Leo stepped out onto the porch. He carried a thick, heavy stack of glossy college brochures and his sleek silver laptop. At 18 years old, my grandson had grown into a remarkable, formidable young man. The dark, stormy anger that used to cloud his youthful features was completely gone, replaced entirely by a sharp, focused adult determination. He pulled up a woven wicker chair beside me and dropped the heavy brochures onto the small glass patio table. He had spent the last 3 months living permanently in my spacious guest room, entirely separated from the toxic radioactive wreckage of his parents' lives. We had spent our quiet evenings cooking hearty dinners together, auditing complex commercial property reports, and preparing him for a future he actually wanted to pursue. I watched him open his laptop, his long fingers moving rapidly and confidently across the keyboard. He was not intercepting hostile network data traffic today. I was filling out early admission applications for the absolute top-tier business schools in the entire country. I reached over and tapped the glossy cover of a brochure for a highly prestigious university on the East Coast. I told him he had the excellent grades, the ironclad discipline, and the absolute perfect analytical mindset to succeed in their rigorous program. I also told him with absolute certainty that he would not have to take out a single terrible student loan to achieve his dreams. 2 weeks ago, I had sat down in the plush downtown office of Jonathan Vance and completely restructured the massive, irrevocable blind trust I had established. I officially designated Leo as the sole ultimate beneficiary and the primary managing trustee upon his 25th birthday. Every single lucrative commercial property, every high-yield corporate investment account, and the entire $2.5 million liquid inheritance from my late brother Thomas now legally belonged to him. The wealth I had spent a lifetime building was going directly to the only family member who possessed genuine, uncorrupted integrity. Leo looked up from his glowing computer screen, his dark, highly intelligent eyes meeting mine. He did not offer a rehearsed, sycophantic speech of fake gratitude like his father absolutely would have done. He simply nodded, his strong jaw set, with a quiet, profound respect. He understood the massive heavy weight of the financial legacy I was handing him. He had stood bravely on that country club stage and watched me ruthlessly dismantle his parents' extortion plot piece by piece. I knew exactly what it took to protect a family empire from predators, and he was ready to learn everything I had to teach him. We sat together in this comfortable, easy silence of the summer porch, listening to the soft breeze move through the full green branches of the oak trees. I leaned back in my chair, looking straight ahead at the quiet suburban street. The raw, burning pain of being betrayed by the child I had carried, raised and loved unconditionally, was a deep, invisible scar that would never truly fade away. It is a unique, devastating agony to realize your own son views your breathing life as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle blocking his access to your bank account. But that specific, lingering pain was entirely overshadowed by the immense, soaring satisfaction of surviving the ambush. They thought I was a tired, grieving old widow, ready to be quietly discarded into a sterile state-run medical facility. They completely forgot that I survived 4 decades in an industry specifically designed to crush weak, naive people. I smiled softly, tapping the thick manila notary folder resting securely on my lap. They thought my age made me weak, but it just gave me a lifetime of experience in how to ruin them. Tell me, if your own child tried to steal your life, would you have left them with anything